Hello! Hi, chat. How are we all doing today? It's been a little bit since I streamed, yeah? No, it was about 5 days since I last streamed. Work has been kicking my ass, sorry about that. I'm gonna try and stream as often as I can, but motivation has just been kicking my ass as well. But I figured today I had enough time to do a little stream of reading more Tommyinnit's Clinic for Supervillains. 1 second. Sorry about that. Anyway. Anything I want to say? Oh, yeah. If you're new to the stream and haven't dropped a follow, you can follow me on any of my socials that you see there. And you can follow me on Twitch here as well. Here is Twitch. I don't stream for 5 days and I forget how to. Jesus Christ. But yeah, and my follower goal is once I hit 150 followers, I'm gonna read Percy Jackson on stream. And have that be a little series, I guess. Hopefully I'll get to do that before the new Disney Plus series comes out. I'm sure that'll happen. But have you heard about that? The new they started casting people for the Percy Jackson series on Disney Plus, and it's the kid from the Adam Project. I'm excited for that. Oh, but my mouth tastes funny all of a sudden, so I'm gonna pop in one of these Listerine patches, and then we're gonna get on to reading Tommyinnit's Clinic for Supervillains. So, summary of what's happened is this is an alternate universe where the members of the Dream SMP, they all live in a place where superheroes and supervillains exist, and vigilantes. Tommy has healing powers. He saved a supervillain from bleeding out in an alleyway one night on his own accord. And that roped him into the syndicate of a group of supervillains, giving him a job to heal them if they need it. Tommy's roommates, Tubbo and Rambu, are vigilantes, but the superhero Dream found out about Tommy's whole ordeal with supervillains and kidnapped him to try and get information on the identities of the supervillains, which he did not know for moments like that if they were to happen. The syndicate all grouped up with Tubbo and Rambu to save him. And Tommy found out that his friends Wilbur, Phil, and Technoblade are supervillains Siren, Nephris, and Blade. And Siren was the one that he healed. And now he's just, now he's known for a bit that Tubbo and Rambu were vigilantes, but now, he knows the identities of Siren, Zephyrus, and Blade. So... Oh, and he also found out that his boss, because he works at a cafe, he found out that his boss was the former hero, the captain, Puffy. Alright. Without further ado, let's read the next chapter. Also, disclosure, I use accents for my immersion. I don't care if it's cringe. I'm sorry, but not sorry. Alright. The story is by Bones and the Bees, and I think that's also their Twitter username, so be sure to drop a follow and show them some support. Chapter 21. Late Nights. Summary. Tommy continues to recover and has a few more important conversations. Any trigger warnings? Okay, no, we're good. Tommy ended up sleeping through the rest of the day. He woke up long after the sun had gone down, with his mouth feeling like the literal desert. The water glass on his nightstand was empty, and he groaned internally at the realization that he was going to have to get up to fill it. Tubbo was dead to the world, snoring with his legs thrown over Tommy's, and his head resting on Rambu's stomach. Tommy had no idea how he even got in such a strange position in his sleep, but it was Tubbo. There was usually a lot of unexplained stuff going on with him. Thankfully for Tommy, though, Tubbo wouldn't wake up even if Tommy smacked him in the face with a pillow, which was something he had tried before. So he was able to shove Tubbo's legs off of him without disturbing the boy's snores, and stumbled out of bed and to his feet without much issue. Well, except for the fact that he was fucking sore. His entire body ached, which wasn't exactly surprising, but God, it was a pain in the ass. His ribs screamed in protest with every step he took, so he ended up holding on to the wall as he slowly made his way down the stairs and towards the kitchen. He crept down as silently as he could, listening just in case he heard footsteps either above or below him. It wasn't like he was afraid of running into Wilbur or anything. No way. Not at all. He just would rather avoid that confrontation at the moment if he could. The kitchen light was off, and the stove clock told Tommy it was nearly 2 a.m. Great. His sleep schedule was fucked up now. At least the kitchen was empty. Grumbling under his breath about how this was going to make his shifts hell if he couldn't get his sleeping back on track, he set his cup down on the counter and opened the fridge to take out the water pitcher. When he closed the fridge, he nearly screamed when he closed it to find Techno standing on the other side. "Jesus Christ!" Tommy yelped, clutching a hand to his chest. "Give mans a fucking heart attack, why don't you?" "Oh, sorry about that." Techno apologized, taking a step back. "I thought you were Tubbo or Rambu." It was still weird for Tommy to remember that the Soots knew Tubbo and Rambu now. He hadn't actually seen any of them interact, but they'd been staying at the house since they all rescued Tommy. He wondered if they were all awkwardly formal with one another, or if they were actually becoming friends. He'd always thought that Rambu and Techno especially would get along, and despite the shitfest that was his relationship with the Soots right now, he couldn't help but hope there was some kind of friendship there. "No, it's just me," Tommy replied, turning around to pour the water into his cup. "I see that," Techno said flatly. God, he'd gotten used to Techno being less awkward around him over the past month staying at the house, so it was strange to see Techno be so unsure now. "Are you, feeling any better?" "Still feel pretty shit if I'm being honest," Tommy said, taking a sip of the water and sighing in relief as the desert in his mouth washed away. "I'm super fucking sore." "Yeah, that tends to happen when you break all your bones," Techno deadpanned. Tommy let out a surprised laugh. "You know, that's a good point. My bones really did just kinda go snap, crackle, pop now, didn't they?" Techno huffed as if he was trying to hide a smile. "Don't say it like that. You'll give the old man a heart attack." At the mention of Phil, Tommy's smile faded as he thought back to their conversation a little bit before he was kidnapped. How Phil mentioned thinking of him like a son, and Tommy thinking that even if he wasn't there yet, He could see Phil becoming a father figure to him. That had to have been real, right? Phil wouldn't have needed to say that just for the act. It wouldn't make any sense. As if on cue, another set of footsteps came towards the kitchen, and Tommy barely got time to prepare himself before Phil was rounding the corner. Techno, where did you... Phil cut himself off when he made eye contact with Tommy, and Tommy froze with his water cup halfway to his mouth. They looked at each other for a few moments, blue eyes meeting blue in an unblinking stare down. Hey, Phil, Tommy said after a moment, setting down his water cup. It was like hitting the play button on a paused TV. Phil was suddenly rushing forward, and Tommy didn't even get to open his mouth again before Phil was wrapping his arms around him and pulling him close. Shit, it's so good to see you awake, Phil muttered, hugging him tight enough to the point where Tommy almost wanted to ask Phil to loosen up because it was hurting his ribs. Almost. Instead of trying to pull away, Tommy found himself melting into the hug. He wasn't sure why. This was Zephyrus. The Zephyrus was hugging him after having lied to him for months. But it was also Phil. Phil who taught him how to play Halo with a seemingly endless amount of patience. Phil who always had coffee ready for him in the morning. Phil who affectionately called him a little shit and would smack Wilbur upside the head whenever he tried to convince Tommy that he needed to eat sand. Besides, it's not like Phil, or Techno for that matter, had lied to him as much as Wilbur had. For the most part, the two of them had just kept their identities a secret. And yeah, he wasn't sure where he stood at the moment regarding the Syndicate and their way of doing things, but he could let himself just have a hug from Phil for the moment, right? They stayed like that for a few moments, Phil holding on to Tommy with the same kind of relief that Tommy had always imagined parents had when they lost their kids in a mall, only to be reunited with them a few minutes later thanks to a friendly security guard. Phil, you might not want to hug him so hard. The kid's a bit sore, Techno eventually chimed in. Almost instantly, Phil's arms relaxed and pulled away, and Tommy was both relieved that his ribs were no longer aching, but also found himself missing Phil's warmth. Sorry about that, Phil said, taking a breath to steady himself. I just got a little overwhelmed for a second, seeing you up and about again. It's okay, Tommy said, folding his arms over his chest as he leaned against the counter. I didn't mind. Phil's face softened at that, and Techno shot him a teasing look. Don't even start. I'm allowed to be glad my... Phil cut himself off abruptly, glancing at the ground. I'm allowed to be glad Tommy's back, so don't be a little shit, Tech. Techno huffed. You're such a sappy old man. Oh, fuck off. Phil rolled his eyes. Anyway, Tommy, what you doing awake? It's pretty late, mate. I got thirsty. Tommy shrugged, pointing to the water pitcher behind him. Well, it's good for you to stay hydrated, so drink as much as you can, Phil said, nodding in approval. Tommy snorted at how much of a dad he sounded like there, but decided not to voice that thought. There was an awkward silence that fell over the three of them then. Tommy took a long sip of his water, waiting to see if Phil and Techno were going to keep trying to talk to him, or if they were going to leave him be. Techno shuffled over to the cabinet, pulling out a bag of chips. Phil seemed as though he wanted to say something else to Tommy, but wasn't sure how to go about it. Finally, I think you know we owe you an apology, Tommy, Phil said, folding his arms over his chest. Tommy wasn't sure what he had expected Phil to say, so he just nodded at that, figuring it was best to let him continue. Sorry. You didn't want to get involved in our problem, and we kind of forced you in anyway. And then you came here to stay with us, not knowing that you were just getting even more caught up in the villain bullshit than you already were, Phil explained, glancing at the ground. We thought it was better to keep you in the dark about our identities, but in the end it didn't really matter. You still got hurt. Tommy frowned. I mean, Dream kidnapping me wasn't your fault. I should have been more careful. It was our fault, Techno cut in. We had an obligation to keep you safe, and we didn't figure out what was going on until it was too late. There were a lot of ways we could have been smarter about this whole deal, and you were the one who had to deal with the consequences. Falling silent, Tommy wrapped his arms around himself, one question burning in his mind. He didn't want to ask it, terrified of what the answer was going to be, but at the same time, he knew it was going to eat away at his mind unless he found out the truth. Did you guys ever actually care about me? He whispered, keeping his eyes on the floor. Or did you just agree to let me stay here because you could keep a better eye on your healer? Phil sucked in a sharp breath at that. Oh, Tommy, no! How could you even think that? He asked, something hurt dripping from his tone as he stepped towards Tommy. Of course we care about you. I wasn't lying when I said what I said that day in my office. Fuck. It was exactly what Tommy wanted to hear, but how could he even be sure it was true? Sorry, that's my dog. You don't have to lie, Tommy said, squeezing his arms around himself tighter. I'm not going to stop healing you guys if you tell me the truth. Suddenly, there were warm hands on his face, and his head was being tilted up to meet Phil's eyes. We're not lying, Phil said, meeting his gaze steadily. I don't give a shit if you decide you never want to heal any of us again. I wouldn't try to stop you if you wanted to cut us off entirely. But if you're worried about what we think of you, I hope you know I consider you just as much mine as Will and Techno are. Tommy's breathing hitched as another warm hand was placed on his shoulder, and he saw Techno giving him a pained look. It wasn't fake, Techno reassured him. We all care about you, Tommy. Tears burned in the corner of Tommy's eyes, and he found himself leaning into Phil and Techno's gentle touches. What's about Will? He whispered, his heart pounding. Did you just befriend me because I healed him? I think that's a conversation you need to have with Will himself. But I can tell you he loves you so much, Tums, Phil told him, pulling him into another hug. He was an absolute wreck when you got taken from us. He'd been hiding in his room since you woke up because he doesn't think you'll want to see him, Techno explained, squeezing his shoulder. But before that, when you were still passed out, we couldn't get him away from your room. Even when we kept telling him you had healed yourself, he was convinced you were going to stop breathing or something. Shit. Had Wilbur really been that worried? It sounded like him for sure. He didn't know anymore, but the sincerity in both Phil and Techno's voices right now made Tommy want to believe everything they were saying. He wanted to believe it so badly that he wasn't just a tool, that he actually meant something to them. Still, he needed to talk to Wilbur. But maybe not right now, considering it was the middle of the night. Okay, Tommy muttered, pulling away from Phil's hug. Thanks. Of course, mate, Phil said, dropping his arms. You can take your time with this. I'm sure it's a lot to process. Tommy huffed. Yeah, you can say that again. You should probably go try to sleep some more, Techno then chimed in. You're still recovering, so you need as much rest as you can get. Resisting the urge to roll his eyes, Tommy refilled his water cup again, before putting the pitcher back in the fridge. You're such a mother hen, Techno, he grumbled. Techno narrowed his eyes. I'm not a mother hen. You totally are, Tommy shot back. Phil, the child is bullying me, Techno complained, shooting a pleading look to Phil's way. Phil snorted. I don't know, Tech. You were the one checking his temperature and his pulse every hour when he was still sleeping. Phil! Techno whined, the pleading look only getting stronger. Come on, I got a reputation! Aw, Techno, were you worried about me? Tommy teased, giving Techno a shit-eating grin. You're such a fucking softy, man. Imagine if people knew the terrifying Blade himself was all motherly and shit. All the edgelords who worship you on Twitter would be heartbroken. Even if you exposed me on Twitter, no one would ever believe you, Techno joked, almost cracking a smile. Tommy pouted and Phil chuckled. Well, Twitter aside, you really should be getting back to bed, Tommy, he said, putting a hand on Tommy's shoulder to guide him out of the kitchen. If you want to come down for breakfast in the morning, feel free. But Will will probably be there, so you can also just text me or Techno and we'll come bring you something. Thanks, guys, Tommy said, shooting them both a small but grateful smile over his shoulder. Then, with one last look, Tommy headed back towards the stairs. He kept his steps as light as he could, but it was hard when his bones felt like they were filled with lead. Despite how awake he'd been before getting up, he was already starting to feel the exhaustion creeping over him once more. Damn. Had to make a mental note not to go and break all his bones again anytime soon. Once he reached the third-floor landing, he headed towards his room. Wait. Yeah, but paused when he heard the soft click of a door shutting. Tommy whipped his head towards the sound, and his heart leapt in his throat when he saw it came from Wilbur's room. A soft yellow glow was peeking out from under the door. Wilbur was still awake, and it seemed like he'd watched Tommy come up the steps before shutting the door so he didn't spot him. Tommy stared at the door for a moment, practically able to feel Wilbur standing on the other side, both of them holding their breath as they waited for Tommy to make his move. Tommy found himself in front of Wilbur's door, hand raised to knock against the wood. This was it. He could knock right now and ask the question that was burning a hole in his mind. He could ride off the high of how well things had gone with Techno and Phil and use the momentum to rip the Band-Aid off. But if Phil was wrong and Wilbur really had just been using him, well, it was late, and Tommy was getting really tired now. He definitely wasn't in the best state to deal with that kind of pain. Was it an excuse to put the hard conversation off? Yes. Did he do the same thing with Tubbo and Rambu? Also yes. So was he going to do it again? Absolutely. Letting out a deep sigh, Tommy dropped his hand and turned away from Wilbur's door. He ignored the eyes he felt on the back of his head as he headed back into his own room, and slipped into the darkness as quietly as he could. He didn't look back as he shut the door behind him. Crawling into his bed again, Tommy grunted as he shoved Tubbo's legs to the side so he could stretch out again. As soon as he got settled, though, Tubbo huffed in his sleep and his legs fell on top of Tommy's again, and Tommy only sighed because he knew there was no way he was going to get Tubbo to move off of him when he was this deep in sleep. Somehow, though, despite Tubbo's legs resting heavily on his own, Tommy's fatigue was all too eager to pull him back under for more sleep. The next morning, Tommy woke to sunlight filtering in through his curtains, creating slanted shadows across his face. He blinked open his eyes and tried to turn on his side to grab more water, but paused when he felt a heavy weight on his shoulder. Tubbo had once again shifted in his sleep, now splayed out like a starfish with his limbs falling over both him and Rambu. "Fucking hell, Tubbo," Tommy grunted, trying to shove his friend off of him. Tubbo groaned. 5 more minutes, he slurred, burying his face into Tommy's shoulder. "No, Tubbo, move," Rambu cut in, and Tommy glanced over to see the other boy staring at the ceiling with one of Tubbo's arms laying on top of his face. "Fuck you," Tubbo grumbled. "No, fuck you, you clingy bitch," Tommy shot back, reaching blindly behind him to smack Tubbo in the face. "Asshole!" Tubbo yelped, smacking the back of Tommy's head in retaliation. "Hey, I'm the injured one here," Tommy argued, now turning around to face Tubbo. Tubbo finally moved his arms and legs off of Tommy and Rambu, now fully awake, scowling at the two of them. He huffed as he sat up, his hair sticking in every direction, while Tommy stretched out in relief at finally being free. "I hate you both," Tubbo mumbled, rubbing at his eyes with a closed fist. "You love us," Rambu teased, nudging Tubbo with his elbow. Tubbo rolled his eyes, but there was a sleepy grin spread across his face, so it kind of ruined his attempt at pretending to be annoyed. Instead of trying to argue with Rambu, he instead turned to Tommy, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "How are you feeling, Tommy?" Tommy shrugged, sitting a bit straighter against the wall. "I'm alright. Still kind of sore and shit, but better than yesterday. I could probably get up and do stuff and be fine." "You should probably stay in bed today," Rambu argued. Better to just get as much rest as you can." Well, that was a fair point. Tommy didn't exactly want to be up and about in the soot house right now, just on the off chance he ran into Wilbur. But on the other hand, he was bored. Not to mention his stomach was growling like a motherfucker. Besides the pastries Puffy brought over yesterday, he hadn't felt like eating much, and it seemed like it was catching up to him. "If you're gonna make me sit in bed like a fucking sickly Victorian child, or whatever, can you at least go get me food?" Tommy asked, shooting a pleading look Rambu's way. "Can you get me some food too? I think Phil's making pancakes," Tubbo chimed in, matching Tommy's puppy dog eyes perfectly. Rambu sighed at both of them. "Why can't you go, Tubbo?" "Because I'm sleepy," Tubbo whined, leaning heavily against Tommy's shoulder. "Plus, you should do nice things for your husband sometimes." You two still on about the whole getting married bit?" Tommy asked, furrowing his brows. "Not really," Rambu said, "but it's funny to call Rambu my husband," Tubbo added. "Tubbo, I'm not going to do stuff for you because you say I'm a bad husband." "What kind of man refuses to get his husband breakfast in bed?" Tubbo asked, fluttering his lashes at Rambu with far too much innocence to be genuine. Sighing again, Rambu pinched the bridge of his nose. "Fine, I'll go get you guys breakfast." "Thanks, Boo," Tubbo grinned. Huffing, Rambu disappeared in a flurry of purple particles, and Tommy jolted back in surprise. Obviously he'd known that Tubbo and Rambu were Nuke and Ender for quite a while now, but this was the first time the three of them had been spending time together since the reveal with Tubbo and Rambu not in their vigilante outfits. Even though Tommy knew Rambu could teleport, it was still strange to see Rambu, his roommate, teleport out of his bedroom instead of Ender the vigilante teleporting around. An old question that he'd had when the three of them first had their fight reappeared in his head. Why had Tubbo and Rambu hidden their powers from him for so long? As far as he knew, they hadn't been Nuke and Ender for very long, so why had they kept their powers a secret from him the entire time they'd known him? Tubbo was quiet while Rambu was gone, scrolling through his phone with his hair falling into his eyes. Tommy tried to do the same, absently looking through Twitter to see what was going on, but he couldn't actually focus on the words on his screen. Instead, all he could think of was how they'd known each other for years, how they'd known all about his own powers, yet neither of them had bothered disclosing theirs to him. Had they always planned to become vigilantes? Or was there some reason they had entrusted him even before Nuke and Ender came into the picture? Rambu appeared back in the room a few minutes later, balancing a tray full of plates and cups. Each plate had 2 chocolate chip pancakes on it, along with 3 cups of coffee, all with varying levels of sugar and cream in them. Tommy's was the palest shade of brown. Rambu's was somewhere in the middle, and Tubbo took his coffee black like a madman. Once they all had their food settled on their laps, Tommy tried to eat, but he couldn't ignore the nagging in the back of his head as the question turned itself over and over in his mind. If the air was really clear between the 3 of them now, it shouldn't hurt to ask. Hopefully. Guys? Tommy started as he cut his pancake into tiny pieces, more so for something to do than to actually eat. Can I ask you something? Tubbo raised an eyebrow, the steam from his coffee curling around his face. What's up, boss man? Tommy took a breath, trying to figure out how to word the question. You guys have only been Nuke and Ender for, 6 months now? Yeah, around there. Rambu nodded. Yeah, not long at all. Not long enough to justify having hid their powers from Tommy in the many past years they'd known each other. I mean, I guess I get it if you don't want to answer this, but, why didn't you ever tell me about your powers? Like, before you became Nuke and Ender? Tommy asked, keeping his eyes fixed on his plate. There was a pause. Silence hung heavy in the air, and when Tommy glanced up through the hair falling over his face, he could see Tubbo and Rambu exchanging uncertain looks. I thought we agreed no more secrets, Tommy complained, ignoring the way his heart clenched at seeing the 2 of them have another one of their silent conversations. No, Tommy, we're not trying to keep any more secrets from you at all, Rambu rushed to explain, putting his coffee mug down. I guess, I'll go first, though. The truth is, I didn't even know I had powers until, a month before we started the whole vigilante thing. Tommy blinked. What? Yeah, I know. Weird, right? But it's the truth. One day you were at the cafe on a shift, and Tubbo and I were just hanging out at home when he decided to try and scare me as a prank. It worked, but I ended up teleporting myself across the room by accident, which is how I found out I could do that. He paused, picking at his nails. I was gonna tell you as soon as you got home, but Tubbo, kinda convinced me not to. Tommy narrowed his eyes at Tubbo, wincing as a pang flashed through his chest. Tubbo? He prompted. Tubbo looked like he wanted to crawl into his coffee mug and hide. Yeah. Okay, I know that sounds bad, but I promise it had nothing to do with you, he tried to explain, shrinking back against the pillows. I had already been thinking of doing the whole vigilante thing for a while at that point, so when I saw Rambu had powers, I told him to keep it a secret because I wanted to see if he could train and get better at it. Then I told him about my own powers and my plan to be a vigilante, and asked if he wanted to do it with me. I wanted to keep you out of it because of the whole not wanting to worry you shit that I told you before. It was fucking stupid in retrospect, but, yeah. It's my fault Rambu didn't tell you about his powers. Blinking, Tommy's shoulders dropped just a bit, knowing Rambu hadn't been keeping that huge of a secret from him for that long. But that still left Tubbo. Tubbo, who clearly had been keeping his secret for quite a long time. "Why didn't you tell me about yours, though?" Tommy asked, his voice small. Tightening his grip on his mug, Tubbo took a sip of his coffee. He was silent for a moment, and Tommy noticed his hands were shaking. "I don't like my powers," he said quietly. I've gotten a bit less scared of them recently, but for most of my life, I tried to suppress them." Tommy frowned. "Why?" "I found out about them when I was 8, Tubbo explained, shoulders hunching. "It was my first foster home. I lived there since I was 5, after I was found in that box that I told you about. Anyway, one day I was just messing around with my foster sister, and then she shoved me and I got freaked out. Then my hands started glowing, and the next thing I knew..." Tubbo made a whoosh noise and mimed an explosion with his hands, making Tommy wince. "Jesus fucking Christ," Tommy whispered. "It's okay. It was a while ago." Tubbo brushed it off, although Tommy could see the regret swirling in his eyes. "She lived, but she was pretty badly burnt. We were in the kitchen at the time, so it got written off as a gas explosion from the stove being left on. But I think my foster parents knew I had something to do with it, because they asked my social worker to take me away not long after that." Fuck. Tommy had thought he knew everything about Tubbo and Rambu's histories in the foster system before the three of them got put together, but apparently that wasn't the case. He didn't blame Tubbo for not telling him that, though. That was intense. It was at that moment that Tommy realized that even though they both had powers, Tommy was never going to understand what it was like to have a destructive power like that. The only thing Tommy could do with his power was help people. He didn't think he could hurt anyone with his ability, even if he tried. But seeing the mixture of fear and guilt swirling behind Tubbo's eyes like an ocean made him try to imagine what it would be like to constantly be afraid of what you were capable of. If one small lapse in control could lead to him killing someone. It had to be exhausting to worry about that all the time. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you talk about something you didn't want to," Tommy said, dropping his eyes. "Nah, it's okay," Tubbo shrugged. "I told Rambu the same story when I told him about my powers. He deserves to know the truth." My stupid dog. Tommy nodded. "I appreciate it," he murmured, taking a mechanical bite of his pancake. He chewed for a moment, mulling over the new information in his head, before another question came to him. "But then, why the whole fucking crime fighting thing?" "I guess I just got sick of seeing all the hero bullshit on the news," Tubbo explained, perking up a bit at the change in topic. "I knew I had a powerful ability that I could really fuck some people up with. And even if I didn't like using it, I felt like I should at least try to learn how to control it instead of just pretending like it didn't exist. And if I was able to help some people at the same time, then that was even better, you know?" "Yeah, I get it." Reaching out, Tommy rested a hand on Tubbo's shoulder and squeezed. "Don't worry, I get it, big man. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about my powers earlier. I promise it wasn't that I didn't trust you or anything. I just didn't want to have to explain that whole thing to you guys," Tubbo said, giving Tommy a sad smile. "It's fine. Like I said, I understand." Tommy nodded, the weight having lifted itself from his chest completely now. Anyway, enough of the depressing shit. You guys have got to try Phil's pancakes. They are the best fucking things you're ever gonna get. Haven't gotten a chance to try Phil's cooking yet. So far we've mostly just been eating Techno's potatoes, Rambu told him. Baked potatoes? Tommy asked. They nodded. The mashed potatoes? More nods. Potatoes au gratin, or however the fuck you say it? No, potatoes au gratin, or however the fuck you say it? I think it's potatoes au gratin, and yes, he made those too. Rambu corrected him. It's not bad. Like, Techno's a really good cook, but I'm kind of relieved we're getting a break from potatoes. Tommy snorted. Try living with him for as long as I have. Tubbo rolled his eyes. Oh, poor Tommy. Getting to live in this fancy-ass house, eating all of this rich-ass food, while Rambu and I live off ramen like peasants. You've already forgotten us for the bourgeoisie, haven't you? I haven't forgotten you for the bourgeoisie, Tommy protested. I don't know, Tommy. Your sweater looks more expensive than half our closet back home combined, Rambu pointed out, reaching over to tug at the heavy knit fabric. Which boy, Tommy? Tubbo teased, giving Tommy a shit-eating grin. Sorry, but when the revolution comes, I'm gonna have to guillotine you. Letting out a fake gasp, Tommy clutched at his shirt dramatically. I can't believe my own best friends would do this to me. Look, man, we gotta eat the rich. I don't know what to tell you. Rambu chimed in, his grin matching Tubbo's. Groaning, Tommy buried his face in his blanket to hide his smile. Even his friends were being annoying. Even if his friends were being annoying, he had missed this so much. Just the stupid back and forth the three of them would have, back when things weren't so complicated between them. It felt like the world between them had finally fallen back into balance, like everything was back to normal. And for the trio, it was. They spent the rest of the day holed up in Tommy's room, Rambu occasionally teleporting out to grab snacks or board games for them to play together. They joked around, caught up on how things had been going in the time they'd been apart, and really just enjoyed being back as a group. It was like an ache Tommy hadn't even realized was there had disappeared, letting him breathe easier than he had in ages. Drink break. But even though one thorn had been removed from his side, there was still another one buried deep in his chest. Despite how much fun he had just hanging out in bed with Tubbo and Rambu the whole day, he found himself missing Wilbur. Not counting the whole half-conscious reveal that he was Siren, Tommy hadn't had a proper conversation with Wilbur since the night he'd been kidnapped. He missed sitting with him as he practiced his songs, or curling up on the couch with him to watch movies, or just listening to him ramble about the random shit that came to his head. It was strange to go this long without seeing him, and even though Tommy had a whole slew of complicated emotions towards the man right now, he just missed when none of that mattered. Before his suspicions had been confirmed. Back when Wilbur was just Wilbur, his best friend, his brother. Was Wilbur like a brother to him anymore? The ache in his chest told him yes, but Tommy wasn't sure. And he was too scared to really think about what that could mean for the future if the answer turned out to be no. Tubbo and Rambu were a great distraction to keep him from focusing too much on these problems, but distractions couldn't last forever. That night, Tubbo and Rambu told him that they needed to go out and patrol East Side, as Nuke and Ender hadn't been seen since the night Tommy was rescued. Tommy argued that it was too dangerous with it being so soon after his rescue, but the two reassured him they'd be extra careful. If they saw even the slightest flash of a hero in the distance, Rambu promised he'd teleport them back to the house, because neither of them wanted to risk getting in a fight when Tommy was still too weak to heal anyone. They changed into their vigilante outfits and waved goodbye to Tommy as Rambu teleported them out into the streets, leaving Tommy alone in his room with nerves bouncing around his chest. Excuse me. He knew Tubbo and Rambu would be fine. They'd gone on countless patrols before without having issues, and they were going to be extra careful this time. No, it wasn't them he was worried about. It was that he no longer had anything to distract him. He tried to keep himself busy. At first, he tried listening to music on his phone, but nearly half his Spotify library at this point were songs Wilbur had recommended to him. Then he tried booting up his GameCube so he could play Animal Crossing, before remembering that Wilbur had been the one to give the old GameCube to him. Eventually, he resorted to just scrolling through Twitter mindlessly. There were a few news reports talking about some reported fight at a warehouse in South Bay regarding Tommy's rescue, but there had been no confirmed sightings as to which heroes and villains were present. Fairly typical for the useless media, if you asked Tommy. It was nearly midnight when Tommy heard footsteps outside his door, which was just barely cracked open. He paused the TikTok he was watching about a hedgehog so he could listen closer, and he saw a flash of brown come from outside. Tommy resisted the urge to sigh as he realized what was going on. He should just get it over with. He wasn't going to get any peace until he jumped headfirst in the water, no matter how cold it might be. "Will, stop fucking creeping outside my door and just get in here," Tommy called out, wincing at how his voice slightly wavered. The pacing steps froze. "Sorry, I didn't mean..." "Shit, I'll just go," Wilbur called back. Tommy huffed. "No, get your ass in here. We need to talk." Another pause. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. Now hurry up before I change my mind," Tommy grumbled, trying to shove down the fear making his heart pound in his chest. There was another beat of silence, and then the door to his room slowly creaked open. Wilbur poked his head in, and Tommy immediately flashed back to being on the roof, pain making his head spin as Wilbur's face stared out at him where Siren had just been a moment before. Wilbur looked terrible right now, to say the least. There were dark bags under his eyes, and his hair was a complete wreck, as if he'd completely given up on his complicated hair routine. He was dressed in a loose sweatshirt and sweatpants, and honestly, it looked like he hadn't gotten out of bed in days. Though, to be fair, Tommy doubted he looked much better. "Where are Tubbo and Rambu?" Wilbur asked, glancing around the room. "They're out patrolling in East Side. Didn't want to let Nuke and Ender disappear from public eye for too long," Tommy explained. Nodding, Wilbur made his way into the room, awkwardly shuffling towards the chair that was still settled next to his bed from the day before. Wilbur seemed to be trying to avoid Tommy's eyes, but there was some complicated emotion on his face that Tommy couldn't place. It was like he was guilty, but also on the verge of tears, but also relieved all at once. Tommy didn't understand it, but instead of asking, he just waited for Wilbur to sit down. Then, once he had settled, Tommy realized he had no fucking clue where to go from here. Shit. Maybe he should have thought this through a bit more. "Hey," Tommy said quietly, for lack of knowing how else to start this. "Hi," Wilbur replied, keeping his eyes on his lap as he wrung his hands together. Things fell silent between them again. So far, going great. Jesus Christ, Tommy was an idiot. It was much, much harder than Tommy had expected it to be to just sit there with a straight face with Wilbur only a few feet away from him. There were so many thoughts and emotions swirling in his head. It felt like a hurricane had started up inside his mind. He was angry, he was sad, he was hurt, but he was also just so fucking happy to see Wilbur again. A small part of Tommy desperately wanted to reach out and hug him, but he kept his arms firmly at his sides. After taking a few moments to think over what to say, he figured starting with the obvious made the most sense. "So you're Siren," Tommy said, bringing his knees to his chest. Wilbur nodded. "Yeah, I am," he answered, pushing his hair back from his face. I wanted to tell you. I tried telling you several times, actually. But Techno and Phil were really strict about making sure I didn't reveal my identity because we didn't want to put you in danger." Tommy thought back to their conversation on his second night at the Soot House, when Tommy was so dizzy from healing Nemesis he could barely stand up straight. How Wilbur had confessed he was keeping something from Tommy, and Tommy had replied that he was keeping something from him too. God, the irony. "I'm not mad you didn't tell me you was Siren," Tommy started, resting his chin on his knees. "I understand why you couldn't tell me that. You guys were just trying to keep me safe." Wilbur snorted, but it wasn't out of humor. It was more bitter than that. "Yeah, look at how that turned out." Tommy rolled his eyes. "It was good you guys didn't tell me. 404 used his freaky fucking powers to spy on my dreams, and if I'd known your identities, he probably would have seen it." "Wait, 404 used his dream interrogation on you?" Wilbur asked, something pained edging his tone. Tommy nodded and Wilbur's face fell. "Shit, I'm so sorry, Tommy. I've heard stories about what 404 can do. I can't imagine how nightmarish that must have been for you." Clenching his jaw, Tommy pressed his face into the blankets over his legs. "I don't want to talk about his dream shit," he muttered, before reaching his right hand over to pinch the skin on his left palm. There was a sharp sting, and Tommy took a breath to remind himself again that this was real. "Maybe I'll tell you later. That's not what we're talking about right now." "Yeah, no, of course," Wilbur agreed, although he still seemed upset. Hold on. Oh, there it is. "Whatever. Not the focus of the conversation right now." Tommy pinched himself a little harder before forcing himself to let go of his palm. Taking another shaky breath, Tommy thought of the next burning question in his head. One of the main thoughts that had been circulating in his mind since he first let himself fully accept that Wilbur was Siren. "Like I said, I'm not pissed that you hid your identity from me," Tommy repeated, staring at the small bead of blood on his palm from where he'd broken the skin, pinching himself. "But you took advantage of the fact that I didn't know who you were under the mask. Siren asked me what I thought about Wilbur, and I don't know. I guess I just want to know if this was all some fucking game to you," Tommy asked, wincing when his voice cracked at the end. There was a sharp intake of breath from Wilbur, but Tommy didn't look up to meet his eyes. "What?" "Was it real?" Tommy pushed, pulling his knees closer to his body. "You and me being friends? The whole brother shit? Was that real? Or were you just trying to keep your healer close by?" A beat of silence passed with Tommy's heart racing in his ears. He risked a glance up at Wilbur, and saw he was staring at him with one of the most heartbroken expressions he'd ever seen Wilbur make. "Tommy," Wilbur whispered, reaching out to grab his wrist, squeezing it gently. "None of it was fake. I swear on my life. I didn't befriend you for any reason to do with your healing. I just genuinely thought you were fun to talk to. Then I got to know you better, and you got me, and I got you. We just clicked, you know? Nodding, Tommy lifted his head a little bit from his knees. They had clicked so well, it was like they had already known each other for years. Sure, he'd technically met Siren before he met Wilbur, but he had only talked to Siren twice, and one of those times he was passed out for most of their time together. No. Tommy had gotten to know Wilbur first, and Wilbur was right in saying that they just clicked together, like puzzle pieces. I swear on my life, I wasn't even planning on telling Phil and Techno about you until Phil got shot that night. Wilbur continued when Tommy didn't respond. And then I just panicked because I didn't know how badly Phil was injured. I didn't plan to use you as a healer again, it just happened. That's not why I became friends with you. I promise. Tommy winced at the mention of the night Phil was shot, his mind flashing back to the security footage of Siren. You know, Dream showed me some security footage from that night, Tommy said softly, now watching Wilbur's face. When you were fighting those cops at the warehouse? Wilbur paled. You saw what I did? Yeah, Tommy whispered. He told all those men to kill each other. Wincing, Wilbur let go of Tommy's wrist. I did. Yeah. Tommy took a shaky breath. Of course the footage was real, but some small part of him had been hoping it was fake, that Dream had somehow doctored it. But no. It was real, and Wilbur just admitted it. Why? Tommy asked after another beat. You didn't have to kill those guys. You could have just made them fall asleep. Clenching his jaw, Wilbur nodded. You're right. I could have done that. The truth is, I just didn't think of it, he admitted, wringing his hands again. Like I said, when Phil got shot, I panicked. I could tell it was bad, but there was so much going on. There was no way for me to tell just how bad it was. I didn't know if he was dying or if it just grazed him. All I knew was that I had to take care of the police officers left behind, and I just got angry. They could have killed my dad, and I was fucking pissed. So the order just slipped out without me really thinking about it. Somehow the confession was both a relief and a horrible weight on Tommy's shoulders at the same time. On the one hand, Wilbur knew full well what he did was wrong, but he'd done it out of fear and anger for his father. His family had been hurt, and he retaliated. Tommy understood that. But he had killed so many people. Only one of those officers had shot Phil, but all of them paid with their lives. Wilbur hadn't even thought twice about killing people, as if their lives just meant nothing to him in that moment. Tommy felt vaguely sick as he met Wilbur's eyes again. Do you regret it? Tommy asked. I do. Wilbur nodded. I've killed before, but never that many at once. I barely slept for the rest of the week after that happened. Letting out a shaky breath, Tommy nodded. There was another question burning in his mind, but he didn't know if he wanted to answer it. But now was the time to hash these things out. He either discovered the truth now, or he was never going to. Can you stop killing people? Tommy whispered, feeling like a little kid asking if he could skip school that day. This time, Wilbur was silent for a long moment. He stopped wringing his hands, instead staring at the ground, with Tommy practically able to hear the storm in his mind. As the seconds ticked on, he squeezed his eyes shut before opening them again and letting out a breath. Wilbur glanced up to meet Tommy's eyes through the curls falling in his face. No, While I can try to keep from losing control of my emotions like that again, I can't promise I'll never kill someone again. Not in my line of work. It was a confession. An apology. A plea. Tommy heard all the different tones in Wilbur's words, the infallible truth in his voice. This was the way things were in the world of villains and heroes. People died, and no pleas of Tommy's were going to change it. When Tommy didn't say anything for a long moment, Wilbur spoke again. "Is that a deal breaker?" he whispered, fear dripping from his voice. "I understand if it is, if you don't want anything to do with me because of this." Was this a deal breaker? Tommy wanted to say yes. God, he really wished he could open his mouth and say that yes, this was too far for him. He had really stretched his moral boundaries enough healing the syndicate, but if innocent people were going to continue to be harmed, then he wanted nothing to do with the villains. That's what he should say. That was the right thing to do, and Tommy had always said he was just trying to do the right thing. But Tommy knew the truth, and as much as he hated to admit it, Wilbur deserved to hear it. "No," Tommy whispered, twisting his fingers into the blankets. "I should say it is. I know I should, but I can't because I'm too fucking selfish." Sitting here, Tommy could see exactly why Flame had done what he'd done, why he had refused to turn Dream and 404 in despite not condoning them kidnapping Tommy. As much as he wanted to resent Flame for refusing to help him, Tommy couldn't, because he understood it now. Dream and 404 were Flame's family, and even if he didn't approve of what they were doing, he was too selfish to live in a world without them by his side. Tommy was the same way. He was too selfish to cut Wilbur off, to leave behind the syndicate and go back to the life he had before. The syndicate was his family now. Wilbur was his family. The idea of leaving was too painful for him to bear. "You're my brother, Will," Tommy said, his voice cracking. "I can't cut you off like that, even if I wanted to." And suddenly, Tommy leaned towards Wilbur, arms outstretched with Wilbur meeting him halfway. He pressed his face into Wilbur's shoulder and hugged him as tightly as he could, wanting to sob in relief at how good it felt just to be back with his brother again. Maybe he was selfish, but he could be okay with that. Wilbur squeezed him just as tight, burying his face in Tommy's hair and holding him like he was afraid Tommy was going to disappear at any moment. I don't deserve this," Wilbur told him, sounding rough. "I don't deserve to be your brother. I'm not a good person. Not after all the shit I've done." Tommy scoffed into Wilbur's sweater and pulled him closer. "Shut up," he said into the fabric. "I chose you as my family, and I don't go back on that shit. You're my brother whether you like it or not." Wilbur let out a wet laugh, bringing one hand up to run his hand through Tommy's hair. "Fuck, I missed you so much. I'm sorry for everything. The lying, the tricking you into telling me what you thought of me, letting you get hurt. I'm just so fucking sorry for all of it." "I missed you too, you idiot," Tommy told him. "I don't know if I forgive you for all that shit just yet, but I'm back now and you're not going to be able to get rid of me, dickhead." "I'm going to hold you to that if you get kidnapped again," Wilbur joked, and Tommy could feel his laughter reverberate through his chest. Excuse me. "But seriously, I promise that I'm going to work every day to make sure I deserve to be your brother. Because you deserve the best family possible, Toms." Fuck. Wilbur, that bastard, couldn't just say shit like that. Tommy had already been fighting to hold back tears, but that broke the dam entirely. Tommy cried into Wilbur's shoulder, so many emotions running through him at once. Happiness, relief, guilt, sadness. Tommy knew he was being selfish, but he couldn't bring himself to care because he had just missed his brothers so much. This was his family now. Phil had said that if Tommy wanted it, Tommy could be theirs. He wanted it. Even if it was selfish of him, he wanted it so badly. Eventually, after Tommy stopped crying, Wilbur went to his room and came back with his guitar on hand. He settled down on the bed next to Tommy, strumming out a few tunes while Tommy played Animal Crossing on the GameCube, with Wilbur making a game out of trying to match the town music playing in the game. Hold on a second. Ooh, that felt good. I am this close to crying. Found family stories always get me. When Tubbo and Rombu came back from their patrol, they found Wilbur and Tommy both passed out on Tommy's bed with the GameCube still turned on. Tommy had his head resting on Wilbur's chest, and Wilbur had an arm protectively laid over his shoulders. Rombu turned off the TV, while Tubbo moved Wilbur's guitar so it was no longer half hanging off the bed. Then they shut off the lights in the room and headed downstairs to remake their bed on the couch. And finally, for the first time in days, the night was peaceful. Alright. Chapter 22. Back to work. Summary. Tommy has healed up. Trigger warnings for this chapter talk of someone dying. Alright. If any of you are uncomfortable with the topics of someone dying, I will not be upset if you leave. Let's see. Days passed. Tommy's soreness faded away, and it wasn't long before he was fully recovered from his kidnapping. At least in the physical sense. Tommy spent his days lounging with either Tubbo and Rombu or Wilbur by his side, because now that they had talked, Wilbur was back to being a clingy shit. Sometimes, all of them would pile onto the couch and watch movies, although there was still a bit of tension between Wilbur and Tommy's roommates. It seemed to be getting better with each passing day, though, and Tommy wondered if one day Tubbo and Rombu would consider the Soots as friends. He certainly hoped so. But now with Tommy healed up, a new question hung over the entire Soot household. What happened now? Briefly, Tommy wondered if he was going to move back in with Tubbo and Rombu since they'd made up, but that idea was quickly shut down by Wilbur reminding him that Dream was probably still going to be looking for him since his rescue. Just because Tommy was free now didn't mean Dream was going to give up, so they had to be careful until they could figure out what to do. Technoblade and Wilbur both wanted Tommy to stay in the house until they managed to, well, make a deal with Dream or take him down permanently, just to get him out of the way to ensure Tommy's safety. But there was no fucking way Tommy was going to go for that. He'd been stuck inside for 5 days, and he was already going stir-crazy. Shockingly, despite how much he complained about his job, Tommy found himself actually missing going to work. That's how bored he was. When Tommy first approached Wilbur with the idea of going back to work at Puffy's, Wilbur laughed in his face. Are you fucking kidding? The last time you were at Puffy's, you got kidnapped. You're insane if you think we're going to let you go back to work. Wilbur scoffed, half sunken into the couch. Tommy frowned. I'm not just going to stay in here forever. Plus, Puffy's got to be scrambling for someone to cover my shifts, and that's not really fair to her. Don't get me wrong, Puffy's like an aunt to me, but I think she'd rather you be safe and deal with being understaffed than let you get hurt again, Wilbur argued. Wilbur's right. Techno cut in from the kitchen where he was currently in the midst of peeling up, you guessed it, potatoes. We're not letting you get kidnapped again. It was pain enough the first time finding that dumb warehouse Dream rented. It was early evening. Outside, the setting sun had turned the city sky a dark shade of fiery orange, and Tommy knew that soon, Tubbo and Romby would be out in the city on patrol. Right now, they were back at their apartment, since, unlike Tommy, they didn't have any clothes of their own at the Soot House. They would be back later that night, but they were set to have Ender and Nuke do another swoop around Eastside, keeping an eye out for any sign of activity from Dream. So that meant the only people in the house were Tommy, Wilbur, Techno, and Phil. Just like before. On one hand, it was almost nostalgic, for things to feel the way they did before Tommy knew the Soot family's biggest secret. But on the other hand, it was really fucking annoying, because now he knew he wasn't just dealing with the overprotective Soots, but the overprotective Syndicate at the same time. But Techno, Tommy whined, dropping his head back against the couch. Come on, I'll be fine. Dream's not gonna try to kidnap me twice from the same place. He's not that fucking stupid. Tommy, we're not letting you go back to work. The risks are too high, Techno repeated. Huffing, Tommy glanced back at Wilbur, who was giving him a smug look. Tommy stuck his tongue out at him, and in turn, Wilbur stretched his legs across the couch and kicked his thigh. Narrowing his eyes, Tommy kicked Wilbur back, and soon the two were kicking each other back and forth. It wasn't enough to hurt, but Tommy could tell it was annoying the shit out of Wilbur, and that's what was most important. Suddenly, Tommy landed a hard kick against Wilbur's side, and he hissed. You fucking gremlin! He exclaimed. You shouldn't have been kicking me, Tommy hissed. You stuck your tongue out at me, Wilbur argued. Oh, like sticking my tongue out at someone is the same as fucking kicking them. Boys. Both Tommy and Wilbur fell silent at Phil's booming voice. Wait 1 second. I dropped something. There you are. The two of them sheepishly glancing above the couch to see Phil standing in the archway to the living room. Not for the first time, Tommy jumped seeing Phil's massive black wings just casually sticking out of his old Rock Band t-shirt. Now that everyone was in on the secret, Phil had no reason to hide the wings around the house. And of course, Tommy knew that Phil was Zephyrus, but it was still startling to be reminded of all the same. Phil! Tommy whined after his moment of surprise passed, hoisting himself up so he was half draped across the back of the couch. The bitchy duo over here won't let me go back to work. Dad, please tell him he's crazy if he thinks we're letting him go back to the same place Dream kidnapped him, Wilbur said, shooting his dad a pleading look. Phil sighed, his feathers ruffling behind him. You're gonna hate me for this, but actually, I think Tommy has a point. What? Techno and Wilbur demanded at the same time. I mean, it's not like we can just keep him here forever. He's got a life of his own, and even if Puffy understands the situation, it doesn't mean it's necessarily fair to her to just take one of her only baristas. Phil explained, walking to the kitchen so he was leaning against the kitchen counter. God knows Foolish has probably been working way too many double shifts since Tommy got taken. Phil, come on. You gotta understand how risky that is, Techno asked, turning away from his potatoes to raise an eyebrow at Phil. I wasn't saying we just sent him out there with no protection, Phil shot back. Obviously, we'd have someone from the syndicate assigned to stay at work with you and get you home, Tommy. Tommy shrugged. While it wasn't ideal, it wasn't like he was trying to hide his healing business from anyone anymore. Having someone there to keep an eye on him really wouldn't be much of a bother in the long run. That's fine by me. See? He agrees, Phil said, gesturing to Tommy while shooting Techno and Wilbur sharp looks. I think you need at least 2 of us assigned to you every night, Wilbur argued, looking back at Tommy. Well, I get where you're coming from, but we don't exactly have the numbers for that, Phil cut in. Besides, I think having 1 person there should be plenty to get Tommy away should Dream show up. The goal wouldn't be to fight Dream head on. The goal would be to just get Tommy back here as quickly as possible. I don't like it, Techno huffed. Me neither, Wilbur agreed. I have no issues with this arrangement, Tommy said, flashing Phil a bright smile. Phil shot him a fond smile back, while Wilbur rolled his eyes. If it makes you 2 feel better, I want to open this as an actual discussion at the next syndicate meeting. Phil continued, glancing at both Wilbur and Techno. Everyone's gonna take our side, I bet, Wilbur snorted. Well, I swear to God, if you use your voice to rig the vote, me? I would never. Philza, how dare you accuse me of such a thing? Wilbur gasped in fake offense. You're such a dramatic little shit, Phil muttered, shaking his head. But anyway, we're gonna have a discussion about that, and we're also just gonna need to fill Tommy in, since there's really no point in keeping stuff a secret from him now. Tommy frowned, straightening up in his seat. Wait, what do you mean by fill me in? Fill me in on what? And there it was again. That fond smile. Everything, Tommy. We're gonna fill you in on everything. Holy shit. Holy shit. Did that mean Tommy was going to get to learn why they formed the syndicate in the first place? And what their goal was? Sure, everyone knew the syndicate's general goal was to take down the hero committee, but there was obviously so much more to it than that. But the syndicate were a mysterious group, and for the most part, their motivations were shrouded in secrecy. But apparently, Tommy was going to be told everything. He had to admit, he was pretty excited. Also, I think you should go to work tomorrow, Tommy, Phil then added after a few moments. Huh? Techno blurted out as he dropped a potato in a pot of water. Tomorrow? Wilbur exclaimed. But no! He's still recovering! I'm fine, asshole, Tommy argued, clambering higher up against the couch. No, you're not! You literally broke like half your fucking bones! And I have healing powers, dumbass. It still takes energy out of you. Yeah, but I've gotten it back now. Wilbur! Phil snapped, seemingly fed up with Wilbur and Tommy's bickering. Wilbur's mouth immediately snapped shut as he spared a nervous look at his father. Tommy had to fight the urge to snicker, knowing it would probably earn him a similarly stern look from Phil. I understand you're worried, but I genuinely think Tommy needs to get out of the house, just for his own mental health's sake. You'll stay with him in the cafe throughout his entire shift, and you'll bring him back here afterwards so we can all take him to the meeting as a group. Does that sound alright to you? Phil asked, pinching the bridge of his nose. Glancing between Phil and Tommy, Wilbur huffed and folded his arms over his chest. I guess I can live with that. Turning back to Tommy, Phil raised an eyebrow. Think you can handle the dramatic one over here during your shift tomorrow? Hey! I don't know, Phil. This was a pretty big favor you're asking, Tommy said, letting out an exaggerated sigh as he fell back into the cushions. Having to put up with a bitch like Wilbur is so exhausting. Oh, you little... Come here! Before Tommy could do anything, Wilbur was lunging at him. Tommy yelped as he got pulled into a headlock, struggling against Wilbur's grip as Wilbur tried to push him off the couch. Phil! Techno! Help me! Tommy yelled. Techno stared at the two fighting for a beat, before snorting and looking back at his potatoes. Phil just shrugged and left the room, ignoring Tommy's pleas for mercy as Wilbur pinned Tommy down, laughing all the while. In the end, Tommy may have accidentally elbowed Wilbur in the face and gave him a bloody nose, but it was his own fault for being a dick. Though of course Tommy ended up healing it for Wilbur, despite Wilbur's protest that it was just a little bit of blood. That night, Tommy texted Puffy to tell her he was going to come back into work the next day. After she checked to make sure it was alright with the syndicate, she seemed very relieved at the idea of having Tommy back at work. And Tommy couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for being gone for so long, even though he knew it wasn't his fault. Oh, I've been there. Trust me, I've been there. Like, I felt guilty having to ask to leave an hour early because I had a migraine. The kind of migraine where it wasn't just a headache, but also nausea. I felt bad having to ask to leave an hour early. Even though I was barely standing still. Surprisingly, Tubbo and Rambu seemed fine with the plan for Tommy to go back to work, as long as Wilbur was there the whole time. As it turned out, with Dream having been off the radar since Tommy's rescue, petty crime was spiking, especially in Eastside. This meant Tubbo and Rambu were even busier than usual, so they were going to be patrolling again the next night. A part of Tommy didn't like the idea of them patrolling while he was stuck in a meeting with the Syndicate, but at the same time, he knew that if the worst happened and one of them got hurt, it would probably be better to be with the Syndicate so they could drive him to wherever Tubbo and Rambu were, since the cafe was kind of unusable as a clinic now, considering Dream could ambush them at any moment there. So the next day passed with Tommy lounging around the house like he had been for the past few days, but this time with excitement running through his veins at actually getting to go do something again. Sure, it was work, but considering how unbelievably bored he was, he'd take just about anything. When late afternoon rolled around, Techno drove Wilbur and Tommy to the Cloudy Cafe. Walking in, Tommy hesitated for just a beat by the front door, remembering the bone-chilling fear that had run through him when he'd walked out those doors and found himself face to face with Dream. But then, Wilbur placed a hand on his shoulder, and Tommy reminded him that he was safe, that Wilbur was going to watch out for him, and things would be fine. As soon as the two of them made their way through the doors, there was an unholy shriek of joy from behind the coffee bar. "Tommy!" Foolish yelled, nearly jumping over the bar to run towards him. Tommy grunted in surprise as the man wrapped him up in a tight hug, and for a brief moment, Tommy wondered if Puffy had told Foolish the truth about what happened. Then, "Oh, thank God you're back!" Foolish giggled, practically dropping all his weight onto Tommy. "I'm never gonna shit-talk the way you organize the bar again. I literally can't keep doing your shifts, man." Tommy blinked, stiffly hugging Foolish back. Sorry? "You're forgiven as long as you never leave me to cover all your shifts again," Foolish said, taking another beat before pulling himself back from the hug. Now getting a proper look at Foolish, it was easy to see that he was probably on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was swaying on his feet the longer he stared at Tommy with a manic smile on his face. While Tommy was sure Puffy had probably taken a few shifts herself to cover, it was clear that Foolish had gotten the majority of the work thrust onto him, and Tommy wouldn't wish that on anyone. Not even Dream. Don't worry, I just, got really fucking sick. But I'm all good to work now, Tommy reassured him, awkwardly patting his arm. Foolish smiled and nodded at this, although his eyes were glazed over in a way that told Tommy he was nearly asleep on his feet. Okay, cool, great, you do that, and I'm gonna go pass out for the next 18 hours, he told Tommy, taking off his apron and shoving it into Tommy's arms. Before Tommy could respond, Foolish stumbled away from him and Wilbur and out the cafe doors. Both Tommy and Wilbur silently watched Foolish from the windows until he disappeared around the corner, leaving Tommy back in control of the cafe. Is he okay? Wilbur asked with a frown. I don't think so, Tommy replied. There was a beat of silence between them. Then, Tommy unfolded the apron and pulled it over his head. Alright, well, I should get to work. You, go sit somewhere and don't bug me. Wilbur smirked. But bugging you at work is how we became friends in the first place. Tommy narrowed his eyes. I'll spit in your coffee. No, you won't. You're too nice, Wilbur teased, flicking Tommy's forehead. While Tommy wanted to argue, he knew that Wilbur was right, and that Tommy wouldn't go that far because that was just gross. Fuck off, Tommy grumbled as he made his way back behind the coffee bar. Wilbur, in all his bitchy glory, sauntered up to the counter and rested his elbows in front of the register. Let me be your first customer for the day. Ugh, fine. What do you want? Flat white, Wilbur told him. Rolling his eyes, Tommy rang him up and watched as Wilbur went over to his usual table in the corner. It was strange. Despite so much having changed, there was so much familiarity in this routine. Bickering with Wilbur during his shifts, trying to figure out ways to fuck with him to make his job more entertaining, so much was different now. But in a way, it was like nothing had happened at all. It was so easy to fall back into his work. Tommy barely thought as he pulled the espresso shots and grabbed a bottle of caramel, fully intending to not make Wilbur the drink he ordered just to fuck with him. Late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of the cafe, once again bathing everything in gorgeous shades of gold and orange. The smell of roasting coffee beans filled the air, and Tommy's shoulders slumped as he took a moment to close his eyes and just breathe in his work. A few minutes later, Tommy was sliding Wilbur's cup onto the pickup bar. He called out Wilbur's name, and Wilbur smirked as he sauntered back over to the bar to grab the drink. When Wilbur picked the cup up, he huffed at the words written on the side. Pussy boy? Really? Wilbur asked, raising an eyebrow at him. It's what you are, Tommy shrugged, trying to keep his expression neutral as Wilbur took his first sip of the drink. As expected, Wilbur instantly frowned at the taste. What? Is this a caramel macchiato? Yup, Tommy answered, popping the P. You brat! Wilbur exclaimed, scowling at him. You know I think caramel macchiatos are way too sweet. Shouldn't have put me in that headlock yesterday, Tommy told him, struggling to stifle his laughter. Wilbur's scowl deepened. Make me my proper drink. Nope. Maybe if you're nicer to me, I'll make you the right drink later tonight, Tommy teased, flipping him off as he went to go help a customer waiting at the register. Huffing, Wilbur stalked back over to his table, and Tommy was pretty sure he heard him mumble, fucking gremlin, under his breath as he reluctantly sipped at his coffee. And just like that, Tommy was back on the clock. An hour and a half passed with nothing very noteworthy happening. Customers filled in, Tommy made coffee, the espresso machine took a shit, and Tommy spent 10 minutes cussing at it until he managed to get it working again. And Wilbur worked on his laptop the entire time. The yellow light of the setting sun turned darker and darker until it disappeared completely. Night was falling earlier now that it was getting close to winter, and Tommy had to admit, he was grateful he wasn't going to have to walk to the subway in the chilly air tonight. Then, there was the sound of a chiming door, and Tommy's attention was pulled to the front as two customers made their way to the register. It was a man and a woman, and Tommy realized he recognized the woman. With her cotton candy pink hair, razor-sharp eyeliner, and her kind smile, Tommy thought back to a time she'd stopped by and tipped him far more than she needed to. The man with her was unfamiliar, albeit rather nondescript, with the only noticeable thing about him being his shaved head. Putting on his customer service grin, Tommy greeted them as they came up to the counter. "Welcome to the Cloudy Cafe. What can I get you?" I think I'll have a small mocha," the woman told him, something warm flashing in her eyes. "And I'll have one of those, blended caramel coffee things," the guy chimed in, gesturing vaguely to the menu. Tommy frowned. "You mean the caramel frap?" "Yup, that thing," the guy nodded. Shrugging, Tommy wrote down the drinks on the cups before meeting the woman's eyes again. "Alright, name?" The woman met his eyes steadily, a grin tugging at the corners of her lips. "Nikki." Nodding, Tommy started to write the name down on the cup, but froze before he'd even gotten to the K. Nikki. Nikki was Nemesis's real name. This girl had the same cotton candy hair that Nemesis did. She was the same height and build as the villain as well. As the realization dawned on Tommy's face, Nikki let her warm grin take over her face. "It's good to see you again, Tommy," she said softly. "Holy shit," Tommy whispered. This was Nemesis. Without even thinking about it, Tommy rushed around the counter and Nikki immediately pulled him into a hug. He laughed as he bent down to hug her properly, and he felt her own laughter dance through her shoulders as he squeezed her tight. They stayed like that for a few moments, Tommy too shocked to even think of what Nemesis just casually identity revealing to him implied, before the two of them were interrupted by a cough. Glancing up, Tommy saw the guy with the shaved head smirking at him. Hey up, mate," the guy said. Oh, Tommy was fucking stupid. "Both of you are here?" Tommy asked, letting go of Nikki to give Thanatos a hug. "Of course we are. Of course we are. We wanted to come by and see if you were okay," Nikki explained. "Name's Jack, by the way." No, Jack told him, patting his shoulder a few times before pulling away from the hug. "It's really good to see you, man." Nemesis and Thanatos. Nikki and Jack. Such normal names for the two villains that were the entire reason he actually decided to start helping the Syndicate willingly. "Fucking hell, it's good to see you guys too," Tommy laughed. And it was good to see them. Besides the Soots, Nemesis and Thanatos had been the closest to being his friends out of the rest of the Syndicate. It was just surprisingly nice to see them here. But then, the full realization hit Tommy. "Wait, why the fuck did you two just reveal your faces to me?" Tommy asked, frowning at them. "Isn't that breaking the Syndicate rules?" Before either of them could respond, though, another voice joined in the fray. Well, looks like you guys were too impatient to wait for tonight," Wilbur chuckled as he walked up to the counter. Nikki at least seemed a bit sheepish. Come on, can you blame us? You and Phil and Tech haven't told us anything about how he's doing. I told you he was fine, Wilbur argued. Yeah, but nothing else. Yeah, but nothing else, Nikki said, shooting Wilbur a pointed look. Besides, you got to reveal it dramatically to him right before he passed out, so you can't say shit, Jack added. Plus, we were both craving coffee, so we figured why not. Wilbur huffed. I mean, I don't actually give a shit, but Phil and Techno are super strict on that stuff. Tommy listened to the conversation going on, a few more puzzle pieces falling into place. Wait, so you guys all know each other's identities? Tommy asked, lowering his voice to make sure no one else in the cafe could hear, despite the fact that no one was paying attention to them. We do, Wilbur nodded. You were the only one we kept out of the loop. Everyone else already knew each other's names and faces. But it's probably best for us not to go into it here, Nikki pointed out, glancing around the cafe. We'll be able to talk more about it tonight. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Wait, so are all you guys gonna... That should be the plan unless Phil changes his mind, Wilbur answered before he even finished. But since you know who 5 out of the 8 are, I don't think Phil would go back now. Holy shit. Tommy was going to learn everyone's identities in the syndicate tonight. Is that even safe? Tommy asked, thinking back to 404. The worst has already happened, and we're not going to let you-know-who get his hands on you again, Wilbur told him, brown eyes meeting blue. You deserve to know after everything you've been through. Fuck. They really trusted him that much. If anyone asked Tommy if that made him a bit choked up, he would say that was ridiculous to even ask because he was a big man who didn't get choked up at silly shit like that. But, well, if he quickly excused himself from the conversation to make Nikki and Jack's drinks because his vision was getting a little blurry, well, that was none of their business. After he'd made Nikki and Jack their drinks, they went to sit at Wilbur's table, and the 3 of them fell into a hushed conversation Tommy couldn't make out from the coffee bar. Another few hours passed without much fanfare, and it wasn't long before Nikki and Jack had to head out. They both promised they'd see him in a few hours, though, and Tommy waved them out while fighting to contain his bright smile. Soon, customers started filtering out of the shop. Laptops were closed, empty cups were tossed in the trash can, and it wasn't long before Wilbur was the only one left in the cafe. At one point, Tommy slid out another hot coffee cup onto the pickup bar. Bitch boy, come get your flat white, Tommy yelled across the shop as he began to wipe down the counters. Wilbur laughed as he grabbed his drink, giving Tommy a wry smile when he met his gaze. Aw, did the child feel bad for being mean to the big brother Wilby? He teased. Tommy blinked, fighting the sudden urge he had to smack Wilbur in the face. I will dump that coffee on your stupid fucking head if you don't shut up. Sure you will. You'll dump the drink you just spent time making on a floor you'd have to clean. Wilbur cut himself off with a yelp when Tommy lunged across the counter, trying to make a grab for the cup. You're a fucking feral raccoon, I swear to God. I'll bite you, Tommy threatened. You know, I don't think I doubt that anymore, Wilbur snorted. After that, Tommy finished cleaning up the rest of the cafe, and Wilbur waited by the door like he had so many times in the past. This time, though, he wasn't scrolling through his phone like he usually did while he waited for Tommy to finish up. Instead, his eyes were locked on the windows, watching like a sentry for any sign of movement outside. Right when Tommy was headed towards the door, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the cafe, which Tommy recognized as the same one they took when he went to the first syndicate meeting. Wilbur kept an arm around his shoulders as Tommy locked the doors to the cafe. Tommy leaned into him, his heart beating a little louder in his chest than usual at being outside the cafe in the middle of the night. Just like before. They went straight to the SUV though, and Tommy didn't see any sign of Dream or 404. When they climbed in, Tommy saw Techno was driving again, with Phil sitting up front, meaning Wilbur had to sit in the back with him. The two of them were already decked in their villain outfits, and after Tommy and Wilbur had settled themselves in the back seat, Phil tossed a bundle of clothes at Wilbur's face. "You can get changed when we get there, Will," Phil said. His voice changer turned off for the time being. Despite the fact that Tommy obviously knew Phil was Zephyrus, it was still disconcerting to hear his voice come out from under Zephyrus's veil. This was definitely going to take a bit to get used to, Tommy could tell. "Couldn't have let me just change in the bathroom of the cafe?" Wilbur asked, frowning at the front seat. "I don't know about you, but I'd rather not see a news report about Siren walking out of a well-beloved cafe in Eastside." Techno deadpanned, making Tommy snort. "Who knows? Maybe I'll just tell the news that Siren loves my coffee," Tommy joked. "Imagine if you just came into the cafe in the full get-up, Will. How do you think my customers would react to that?" "That's probably not something we want to deal with, so let's not talk about making the Cloudy Cafe a regular haunt for Siren," Phil cut in. "Anyway, Tommy, how was work?" Tommy shrugged, slumping back into his seat. "It was fine." Wilbur snorted. "Fine? You're not going to mention the fact that you learned Nemesis and Thanatos' real names?" Tommy shot Wilbur a flat stare. "Well, I didn't know if it was okay to tell Phil about that or not." "Wait, you met Nikki and Jack in the civilian forms?" Phil questioned, twisting around in his seat to actually look at Tommy. "He did, yeah. They basically just went up to the register to order their drinks and told him outright." Wilbur laughed. "I mean, I don't think it's a big deal since that was going to happen tonight anyway. The two of them just wanted to see him and make sure he was okay." "But they won't get in trouble, right?" Tommy asked, furrowing his brows. "Because I don't want them to get in trouble because of me." Phil chuckled. "Ugh, no, don't worry. I'm not going to scold Nemesis and Thanatos just because they wanted to properly introduce themselves to you before everyone else could." "Okay, that's good," Tommy murmured, leaning against the window and watching the street lamps blur into one streak of orange light. The rest of the drive was quiet after that. Tommy waited for them to get closer to the Syndicate compound, to the point where they would blindfold him again, but it never came. They crossed through South Bay and further up until they were nearing the middle of the city, with the buildings changing from nice townhouses to actual skyscrapers. It wasn't until they pulled into the parking garage of a nondescript office building that Tommy realized they just weren't going to blindfold him at all. There was the steep decline Tommy had remembered, making him feel sick before the blindfold went on. The underground parking structure was dark, only lit up every few spaces with harsh white light, making the entire place feel very eerie. There were no cars in any of the parking spots either, with everyone who worked in that building clearly having gone home for the day. The car drove down deeper and deeper into the parking garage until they were at the bottom level. Then, Techno pulled the SUV into a random empty spot and cut the engine. "We're here," Techno announced. "So, there's really no blindfold this time?" Tommy asked, glancing between the three of them. No blindfold this time," Phil reassured him, lifting up his veil to flash Tommy a reassuring smile. Nodding, Tommy hopped out of the car, his shoes smacking against the concrete as Techno and Phil did the same. Wilbur didn't get out of the car though, and it took a moment for him to realize that when Phil said Wilbur could change into his siren clothes when they got there, he meant change in the car. It was funny. It was pretty funny to listen to Wilbur struggle to change in the narrow confines of the back seat of the car. There was a lot of grunting, swearing, and at one point a foot smacked against the window. But then, finally, Siren climbed out of the SUV, donning his black coat, dark jeans, heavy boots, and his signature blindfold. I hate changing in the car, you know that, Techno, Wilbur hissed as soon as he was on his feet again. Techno locking the car as Phil led them towards an elevator near the wall. Wouldn't be such a problem if you didn't decide skinny jeans just had to be part of your supervillain wardrobe, Techno shot back with a smirk. Wilbur scoffed. It's about having a cohesive look. Besides, I'm not the one to do a whole bunch of physical fighting, so the jeans work out fine unless I need to change in the back seat of a fucking car. By the way, I've always wanted to ask. Tommy suddenly chimed in, shoving his way between the two brothers. How the fuck do you even see out of that mask? Oh, it's just got, like, dark mesh around the eyes, while the rest is just solid fabric. But it's hidden so well you can't really see the mesh from the outside, Wilbur explained. I used to put dark makeup around my eyes to kind of hide them even more behind all the black, but eventually I got lazy, so I stopped doing it. You mean I called you an emo and you got mad? Techno huffed. Phil snickered at this comment, but didn't say anything as he pressed the button for the elevator. I did not stop just because you called me an emo, Wilbur protested, punching Techno in the arm. Besides, it's not emo to try and wear makeup that helps conceal my goddamn identity. Sure, Techno drawled. Keep telling yourself that while you walk around in Doc Martens and a black trench coat. Wilbur let out an indignant noise as the elevator chimed, signaling its arrival. The four of them all piled into the small metal box, with Phil pressing the B10 button before beginning their descent down. The elevator jolted as it moved deeper and deeper underground. Once again, Tommy wondered if this whole building was used for syndicate stuff, or if they just rented out this one underground office for their dramatic villain meetings. Once the elevator stopped, the doors opened to reveal that same plain, undecorated hallway that led straight to the double doors of the meeting room. Now out of the elevator, Phil rolled his shoulders to manifest his wings, having had them hidden during the car ride. The double doors to the syndicate room were no less impressive than they were the first time Tommy saw them. The intricate carvings were just as stunning as he remembered them. And Tommy made a mental note to ask at some point who the fuck did the interior decorating for the syndicate. When Phil opened the doors to the meeting room and led them inside, Tommy was met with the waiting faces of all the other syndicate members he'd come to know so well. Daedalus, Jester, Rosethorn, Nemesis, and Thanatos had already taken their seats. Phil took his place at the head of the table, with Techno sitting at the other end. Wilbur and him sat in the same seats they had before, and despite the fact that Tommy knew the syndicate far better than he did the first time he'd been in here, he couldn't ignore the nerves buzzing in his chest. As soon as everyone was settled, Phil wasted no time in jumping right into things. Hey guys, glad you all could make it on such short notice. That was awful. Let me try that again. Hey guys. No. Hey guys. Glad you all could make it on such short notice. Notice, Phil said, folding his hands in front of him. As you all know, tonight we are welcoming Tommy in as a full member of the syndicate. Tommy's eyes widened. Wait, I'm what? All eyes in the room suddenly turned to him. Phil, did you forget to tell the fucking kid he was gonna be a syndicate member? Jester asked, his feet resting up on the table. Well, no, I didn't forget. I told you yesterday, Tommy, Phil said, lifting his veil so he could meet his eyes. I said we were going to tell you everything. Okay, but how was I supposed to know that meant I'd be an official member of the syndicate? Tommy asked, his heart pounding in his ears. Phil's brows furrowed. I mean, I thought it was obvious. You already worked for us, so this is just the next step. He paused then, something worried flashing over his gaze. Do you not want to be a member of the syndicate, Tommy? The question was gentle. There was no pressure or judgment in Phil's voice, just genuine concern. But even still, Tommy couldn't help but shrink back in his chair as all the eyes in the room stayed squarely on him. It wasn't that he didn't want to be a member of the syndicate. Phil was right in saying that he basically already was. This would just be making it official. But if Tommy agreed to this, he could no longer say he was just a civilian. He would officially be a villain. Or at least in the city's eyes he would be. Either way, he'd be choosing to fully join this world that he tried so hard to stay out of. Suddenly, there was a warm hand on his shoulder. Wilbur had pulled up his mask and was staring at him with worried eyes. You okay? He whispered. Tommy stared at Wilbur, trying to think if he was okay or not. While he was definitely shocked, he knew that he was already in this world. Hell, he'd already been kidnapped by a hero. Tommy had lost his civilian card long ago, and at this point, he knew full well there was no way to get it back. Besides, his family was here, weren't they? He'd chosen this as his family, and when he told Wilbur he didn't go back on that stuff, he meant it. Again, this was just making things official. No, I want it. No, I want it, Tommy said after a few beats of silence. Sorry, just confused me for a second. Relief washed over Phil's face as he nodded. Okay, that's good to hear. Then we'll cast a vote. All those in favor of Tommy joining the syndicate, raise your hands. Immediately, everyone at the table raised their hands. There wasn't an ounce of hesitation in anyone's eyes, and warmth bloomed in Tommy's chest at their trust. Alright then, that's settled. We'll need to come up with the code name for you at some point, Tommy. But for now, we have bigger things to focus on, Phil said, lifting the hat with his veil entirely off his head. You all know the drill. Masks off. And just like that, with those simple words, everyone in the syndicate took their masks off. Techno rested his boar skull on the table. Wilbur shoved his blindfold in his pocket. Nikki set her masquerade mask lightly on her lap. Jack moved his skull mask on the top of his head. But these were faces he already knew. There was a loud whirring noise as Daedalus pulled his mechanical mask off of his face. His eyes faded from being entirely pitch black to having normal dark green irises. As Tommy took in his face, he realized he had definitely seen Daedalus before. What? You came to the cafe! Tommy exclaimed. You brought your dog to see me! Daedalus laughed and nodded. Yup, Fran really likes you. You gave her whipped cream once and you earned her undying loyalty. Wow. Tommy really shouldn't be surprised considering Daedalus literally told him he'd been to the cafe before, but it was still strange to think about in retrospect. I'm Sam, by the way. Daedalus introduced himself. Sam. What a boring name for such a badass guy. Nice to meet you too, Sam. Tommy snorted. Oh wait. Nice to meet you, Sam. Tommy snorted. Nice to meet you too, Tommy. Then there was a pointed cough to Sam's left, and Tommy's eyes fell on another familiar face. Hannah? Tommy asked, recognizing the waitress from Bad's diner. You're a villain? Yup, sure am. Hannah grinned, playing with her tree bark mask in her hands. Let me tell you, it was so fucking hard to keep a straight face every time you and Wilbur came in for dinner. Sorry about that, Hannah, but he wanted muffins, and it's not like I could just say no, Wilbur defended. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Still a dick move, Soot, she teased. But it's nice to properly meet you, Tommy. You too, Tommy chuckled, leaning back further in his seat. This only left one other person in the room Tommy didn't know. He turned his head to the left and found himself staring into a young man's face with a jagged scar going through his left eye. I fucking knew it, Tommy whispered, meeting Jester's eyes. I knew that was your real face! Jester chuckled. I could see it in your eyes that you knew I was bullshitting you with the whole, oh, it's a random stranger off the street. Truth is, I was just too fucking tired to put on a different face, and I knew I could trust you at that point, so I figured it was fine. Tommy grinned. Well, tell me your name then. Call me Quackity, he told Tommy, grinning wide enough to show a gold tooth he had embedded under where the scar went through his eye. Wait, did Quackity already show you his face? Techno asked, frowning as he looked between the two of them. Technically, yeah, Quackity snorted. I can't trust any of you little shits, Phil muttered, although his voice was fond as he shook his head. For those who don't know, apparently Nikki and Jack took matters into their own hands and introduced themselves to Tommy earlier today. All the eyes then fell onto Jack and Nikki, both of whom were smirking in their seats. What can I say? We wanted coffee, Jack huffed. Can't believe Sam and I are the only ones who can keep a secret identity, Hannah muttered. Oh, the video's at the end. Gotta bring it back to the beginning. Now where were we? Hey, I kept it a secret too. Tommy just guessed mine on his own, Wilbur protested. Like you weren't trying to get him to figure it out by being as obvious as possible. Okay, boys, Phil said, cutting Techno off. I know all of you like to bicker about stupid shit, but we actually have more business to attend to this meeting, so we should get on with it. Folding his hands in front of him again, Phil focused back on Tommy. Tommy, do you have any particular questions for us, or should we just start at the beginning? Tommy gulped as he tried to think if he had any particular questions. There was so much he felt he didn't know about the syndicate. Trying to come up with a single question to encapsulate everything he was wondering about felt impossible. I mean, I guess I just want to know what the hell you're all even trying to do, Tommy said, bringing his knees up onto the chair. Phil nodded. That's a good place to start. To give you the short answer, our goal is to destroy the institution of the Hero Committee and get rid of the entire system of government-sanctioned heroes. And to take down the government and establish an anarchical society in its place, Techno chimed in. Well, yes, that too. But that part comes later, Phil said, dipping his head at Techno. Our primary focus is the Hero Committee. Tommy blinked, wondering if he'd heard that right. Oh yeah, so nothing too big or anything, he drawled sarcastically, mind reeling at how insane that sounded. I know it seems like a lot to take on, but the captain was the last bastion of any kind of good that existed in the hero system, Phil explained, leaning back in his seat. She was the last hope we had in possibly reforming things. Now we aim to take the system down entirely, because it's far too corrupt to try and fix. The idea of paying people with the most powerful abilities in the city to play cops, but with even less restrictions, is just a recipe for disaster, Techno added, folding his arms over his chest. Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense, Tommy muttered, glancing at the table. But you want to take down the government too? Both Wilbur and Techno answered at the same time. Not necessarily. Not necessarily, yes. The two brothers gave each other incredulous looks, and Tommy would have laughed if he wasn't still struggling to process everything they were saying. Wilbur, Techno started, staring intensely at his younger brother. You know we've talked about this. Please don't get us into this fucking argument again, Quackity groaned, dragging his hand down his face. Tommy frowned, looking between all the tired faces of the different syndicate members. He had a feeling this had been a conversation they had gone through several times before. Can someone tell me what I'm missing here? He asked. We have different ideas on what our next steps will be after the Hero Committee is gone, Sam cut in to explain, much to Tommy's relief. Phil, Techno, and Nikki are anarchists and want to take down the government entirely. Wilbur, Jack, Hannah, and myself are more on the side of government reform. And I don't really give a shit either way, as long as I can keep running my business, Quackity said, folding his arms above his head. But we're gonna cross that bridge when we get to it, Phil said, giving Tommy a reassuring smile. Although I would prefer anarchy, I'm not completely against the idea of government reform myself. I am. But either way, none of this is relevant until we first take down the Hero Committee, Phil continued, ignoring Techno's interruption. Huh. Okay. Well, Tommy already knew Techno was an anarchist, considering he had rambled to Tommy about anarchist theory multiple times. But he hadn't realized Phil and Nikki were anarchists as well. In truth, Tommy didn't really understand much about anarchism, so it wasn't like he had a super strong opinion on the subject. So he decided not to comment on that, and figured he could learn more about it when it actually became more relevant to the Syndicate's goals, which at the moment it didn't seem like it was. Alright, focus on the Hero Committee first, I get that, Tommy muttered, nodding to himself. He looked up to meet Phil's eyes again as another question appeared in his mind. How did all this start in the first place, though? I feel like I just woke up one day and the Syndicate was all over the news. How did I come to create the Syndicate in the first place? Phil asked. Tommy nodded, and Phil took a breath. Well, that's gonna require a bit of backstory. Tugging his hair out of his ponytail, Phil ran his hands through his hair before taking a breath and straightening up. When I first started out as a villain, I didn't have any goals to destroy the Hero Committee or take down the government or any of that shit. The truth is, I was a single dad who had unexpectedly ended up with 2 kids in a very short period of time, and money became way more of a problem than I thought it would be, Phil explained, looking between Wilbur and Techno before returning his gaze to Tommy. I didn't necessarily want to turn to crime, but I'd already had my issues with the way the heroes ignored the poorer neighborhoods. So it was easy to decide that if I needed to rob a bank to make sure my boys got to eat dinner, then I was gonna go rob a bank. Pausing, Phil's expression darkened. It didn't take long for me to learn the truth about the way the Hero Committee dealt with villains, and how they manipulated the media in their favor. It wasn't as bad as it is now. The only hero who was working at this time that I think you would have even heard of is the captain, but it was still pretty damn corrupt. When I realized this, I got fucking pissed. The entire system that was put in place to protect L'Manberg citizens was a lie, and the only people who knew the truth about it were the villains. Tommy leaned forward in his seat when Phil took another pause, enraptured by the story. Still, I was a pretty minor villain for my first 5 years or so. I just did what I had to take care of my kids. I didn't want to get involved in anything too intense, because the last thing I wanted was for Will and Tech to get caught up in this shit. Little did you know, we knew the whole time what you were doing. Wilbur cut in, smirking a bit. You weren't subtle about it, Dad. Like, at all. I tried my best, okay? Phil huffed, grinning sheepishly. Well, you sucked at it, old man, Techno teased. But yeah, Will and I knew the whole time that Phil was a villain. So when we thought we were old enough, we both decided we wanted to help him out. I still remember the first time you two brats showed up during a fight because you followed me, Phil mumbled, dragging a hand down his face. Gave me about 20 fucking heart attacks that night. But it was worth it. But it was worth it because we proved our point, Wilbur said. We proved to you we could help, and you let us join you. Only because I knew you two would just start sneaking out to do shit on your own if I said no. I wanted to at least be able to keep an eye on you, Phil argued. But yeah, basically, when Wilbur was around 18 and Techno was 19, the two of them decided they wanted to be villains too, and wouldn't take no for an answer. So the three of us formed our little group, and together we could actually accomplish a lot more than what I was able to do on my own. Also I, unlike Phil, who had just been an edgy lone wolf up until then, actually started talking to other villains we ran into, Wilbur cut in, smiling proudly. And I found out that others actually thought a lot of the same things we did about the Hero Committee. Does it really count when you literally mentored one of our only two allies at that point? Techno asked, raising an eyebrow at Wilbur. You're the one who taught Fundy to hate the Hero Committee just as much as we did. Wilbur rolled his eyes. He was gonna hate them anyway. I just happened to run into him during his first attempt at robbing a place. Wait, did Wilbur just say Fundy? You mean to tell me the fucking fried chicken food truck guy is a villain? Tommy asked, shooting Wilbur a confused look. He was a villain. Went by the name Volpes because he was a sneaky little shit who could turn invisible. He later retired and now has the food truck you and I love so much, Wilbur explained, nudging Tommy's shoulder. Faintly, Tommy remembered hearing one or two things about a villain called Volpes, although he couldn't recall much. Having the power to turn invisible is probably what kept him under the radar, though Tommy would probably try to Google stuff on him when he got home. But why did he retire? Tommy asked, figuring he might not have been a villain for very long since his food truck seemed rather well established. At this, a hush fell over the table as everyone's smiles disappeared, as if a candle had been blown out and darkness had descended. There was a tense silence and the group shared knowing looks with one another, with even Quackity looking serious for the first time all night. Have you ever heard of the villain H94, Tommy? Phil asked after a few beats of silence. Tommy frowned, trying to think if he could remember anything about it in H94. There was some faint flicker of memory there, but it was barely anything substantial. I've heard the name, but not much else, Tommy answered. Well, his real name was H-Bomb, and besides me, Will and Techno, he was the first official member of the syndicate, Phil explained, staring at the table as he spoke. He was a kind man who had been put in a similar position as myself, but he became a villain to survive. He agreed with us about the unfairness of the Hero Committee, so we started working together to find a way to take them down. Tommy noticed how they were only referring to H-Bomb in the past tense, and dread began to pool in his gut. What happened to him? Tommy whispered. Dream happened, Techno said, clenching his jaw. Me, H-Bomb, and Phil were in a fight against Dream, Flame, and the Captain. At the time, Dream and Flame were both still newbies on the scene, and we weren't really sure what either of them were capable of. All we knew was that Dream was being mentored by the Captain, and we hardly knew anything about Flame. But the Captain was someone we were familiar with, and she had always been one of the only good heroes in the system, so we trusted she'd keep her new kid in line. From there, Phil picked up the story. That wasn't what happened, though. No, that wasn't what happened, though. The fight got rough. Techno was fighting the captain, while Dream seemed like he was still struggling a bit with using his powers. And when H-Bomb went for flame, well, Dream killed him. Distantly, Tommy remembered what Nikki had told him all those months ago when he was first healing Jack. Are you saying that heroes have killed villains before? Yes, they have. And if you hadn't saved Iceman, he would have been another death they covered up. And then what Puffy had told him less than a week ago. I tried to stop it, but soon he was dead, and when I reported the hero responsible to the committee, they just didn't do anything. The hero committee covered it up, didn't they? Tommy asked in a horrified whisper. Phil nodded. After it happened, Puffy stopped the fight and apologized for what happened. She also promised to make sure that Dream received proper punishment, and that if he didn't, she would stop working for the heroes. So that's why she retired, Tommy finished, nodding to himself. Because nothing happened when Dream killed H-Bomb. Exactly. Fundy ended up retiring not long after because it scared him so badly. Phil finished, looking pained. And that was when I knew I had to do whatever I could to take that organization down. Bile rose in the back of Tommy's throat. He'd been told that heroes had killed villains before, but to see how much pain the Syndicate was in because of the friend they lost, to hear his name and know that Dream was the one responsible, Tommy was starting to understand why Wilbur said he wouldn't be able to promise Tommy he wouldn't kill again. H-Bomb was my best friend, Nikki then chimed in, her voice softer than usual but echoing in the room all the same. He was the one who introduced me to Wilbur, Techno, and Phil in the first place. I wasn't involved in any of the villain vigilante hero stuff, but I knew who H-Bomb and his friends were, and I understood why they did what they did. She kept her eyes on the table, and a scowl flashed across her face. When Techno called to tell me what happened, though, I realized I couldn't just sit on the sidelines and wait for this to happen to more people. The system was bullshit, and I wanted to play my part in taking it down just like the rest of them. Nikki continued, her voice still quiet, yet razor sharp at the same time. So after I met Jack, and we got our footing as a duo, I contacted Wilbur again and asked if we could join the Syndicate, which is how we ended up here. From there, our numbers just grew, Phil picked up. After H-Bomb's death and the loss of Fundy, it was just back to me, Will, and Tech. But then, Nikki and Jack joined. And then, about a year later, Crackety contacted us about making a business deal. Then, well, I started talking to Sam. Oh yeah, Tommy frowned. How did that whole thing happen anyway? With Sam, switching sides. At this, Sam cleared his throat, drawing all eyes in the room to him. Well, the story is kind of simple in all honesty. The gist of it was that Phil just started talking to me during our fights. He just pointed out a lot of the flaws in the system and how unfair it all was, and it got me to start really thinking about what I was doing. Truth be told, I didn't think that would work at all, Phil said, chuckling a bit. I was just saying shit to distract him. Had no clue Sam was actually listening to me. It worked out in the end because I actually did pay attention, Sam replied. I just started noticing all these problems, and how we as heroes rarely ever got punished for our actions. And I'd known the captain. She and I had been friends before she retired, so I'd heard her complaints plenty of times before then too, but I never took them to heart. But I guess what really changed things for me was when Dream made that building collapse, and the Hero Committee barely did anything to punish him. Sighing, Sam took a beat to push his dark green hair out of his face. I know it was an accident, but he was supposed to be grounded from hero duty, and then the committee pulled him out the second they had an excuse. That was really the moment where I saw that this organization didn't really care about keeping its heroes in check, as long as funding kept rolling in. So when I next found myself and my fellow heroes in a fight against Phil, Wilbur, and Techno, and Phil started asking me again why I was doing this, I just couldn't find an answer. So I left. You left mid-fight? Tommy asked. I did, yeah. I decided I wanted out, so I tried to just flee down a nearby alley. But, I had a run-in with Supreme, Sam said, dropping his eyes to the table as his lips twisted into something pained. Tommy thought back to all the news reports when Warden had first deserted the heroes. How there were rumors about how Warden had viciously attacked his own healer without warning. I'm still trying to think about who Supreme could be. Hold on, let me go through the list of Dream SMP members. Because even I have no idea. Callahan, maybe? Wait 1 second. Probably not Connor. Schlatt, maybe. I really just don't know. And it's killing me, because I don't know. Let's see, where was I? Looking at Sam now, Tommy could see none of the bloodlust that the media claimed Warden had been holding inside of him. He could only see regret and guilt. So much guilt. Tommy could see from his eyes that it was practically drowning him. I didn't mean to hurt him, Sam admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper as he wrung his hands together. I ran into him in the alley when I was trying to leave, and when he figured out what I was doing, he tried to get me to stop. We got into an argument, and I swung my trident out, but not with the intent to hurt him. I just wanted to make it like a warning, to get him to back off. But then he... Sam's breathing hitched as he grimaced, as if just remembering the story was almost too painful for him. I think he was trying to move towards me. Not to attack, I know he wouldn't do that. I'm not sure what he was doing, but he came towards me when I wasn't expecting it, and my trident just... He cuts himself off, and Phil leaned over to rest a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, Sam. I think he gets it. Nodding, Sam took a breath to steady himself. I was horrified by what had happened, but Dream showed up in the alley right at that moment, and I knew Supreme could heal himself, so I decided I just had to get away from him. I ran out and rejoined the fight, but this time I fought with Phil and the others. When they decided it was time to flee, they took me with them, and I've been a member of the Syndicate ever since. Sam finished, his shoulders slumping as he stopped wringing his hands. Tommy let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That was a lot. Wait, Supreme... Ponk. It's Ponk, it has to be. The media had made Warden's betrayal sound so much more spiteful than it was. Instead of the hero suddenly getting a taste for blood and wanting to kill his fellow heroes, he just wanted to leave, and ended up having to fight his way out. Jesus fucking Christ, man, Tommy muttered. That's rough. It's alright. I knew that leaving was still the right thing to do, even if I didn't go about it in the best way. Sam shrugged, the mechanical arms behind his head shrugging as well. But yeah, that's how I ended up joining. And then he recruited me a year later, Hannah announced proudly, cutting through the tension with a cheerful smile. My situation was pretty simple. I worked as a vigilante because I thought heroes were bullshit. I ran into Sam a few times when I was on patrol, and he started talking to me about my motives and stuff. And then he eventually convinced me to become a villain and join the syndicate. Convinced you? You practically begged me to join, Sam said, looking less tense now as he shot a wry grin at Hannah. Oh, shut up! No, I didn't! Hannah protested, punching him in the arm. You were the one begging me! You literally stabbed me at one point. Why would I beg you to join the syndicate? Come on, don't be such a baby. It was one tiny little stab wound and you were fine. Hannah groaned, rolling her eyes. Please don't stab each other and give me more headaches to deal with, Tommy grumbled, running his hands through his hair. There was a chorus of laughter at this, and Tommy felt a familiar arm slide around his shoulders. Don't worry, Toms. There'll be no unnecessary stabbing anymore, Wilbur reassured him, tugging his chair closer. Tommy huffed and elbowed Wilbur in the side to get him to let go, but the clingy bitch refused to move his arm, so Tommy sighed and leaned against his older brother in defeat. Alright, so Tommy, do you have any more questions for us? Phil asked once the table had gone silent again. I don't think so. Tommy shook his head, but I'll let you know if I think of anything. The truth was, while Tommy probably would have more questions later on, he had already learned so much in such a short span of time that he needed a break to process everything. He had already learned he had already learned how and why the syndicate was formed, how each of the members joined, and he even learned about the death of H-94. If he got told any more stories, he was pretty sure his head was going to explode. Besides, he lived with Phil. If he got more questions later, he could just ask him there. Phil nodded. Sounds good. So I suppose this leaves us with our next order of business for the night. What to do about... The blaring of a ringing phone cut Phil off mid-sentence. There was an awkward pause as everyone glanced around the table to see whose phone it was, and it took Tommy an embarrassingly long time to realize it was coming from him. Cheeks flushing red, Tommy pulled his buzzing phone out of his pocket, wondering how the hell he even got service down here. When he saw it was Tubbo calling him, though, he paused, because he knew that Tubbo was supposed to be out patrolling tonight with Rambo. Shit. Wait, had they gotten hurt? Fuck, he needed to take this in case they were injured. Shit. Sorry, guys. I need to take this. Tommy coughed awkwardly, ignoring the villain's eyes on him as he pressed answer on the call. Hey, Tubbo, is everything okay? Fucking hell. We're fine, Tommy, but some bad shit just went down out here. What's going on? Are you hurt? No, we're not hurt at all. We're not hurt at all. We weren't even in a fight or anything. No, we're not hurt at all. We weren't even in a fight or anything. Then what's wrong? Tommy asked, frowning. Let me guess, dream captured them? There was a pause on the other end. We ran into Dream, Toho said quietly. He didn't do anything to us, but he told us to pass you a message. Tommy froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. What was the message? He asked, struggling to keep his voice steady as his heart began to race in his chest. Tubbo took a shaky breath. I don't know how the fuck he did it, but I guess he finally got evidence of you healing Siren or something, Tubbo explained, his voice wavering. And he basically said that if you don't give him what he wants, he's going to have you arrested for aiding the syndicate. What he wants. Tommy knew exactly what he wanted. There was only one reason he had even kidnapped Tommy in the first place. Dream wanted the identities of the syndicate, and if he didn't get them, he was going to arrest Tommy. Oh, fuck me. One more chapter. Chapter 23. Blackmail. Summary. Dream is blackmailing Tommy. Tommy stared blankly ahead for a few moments, with the phone still pressed to his ear, trying to process what Tubbo just told him. He was fucked. Completely and utterly fucked. Boss man? You still there, or did you go into shock? Tubbo asked, his voice crackling a bit over the phone speaker. I'm here, Tommy muttered, ignoring the worried glances from Wilbur and the rest of the syndicate. Was that all he said? Actually, he made us take a video of him saying his demands. I just kind of paraphrased it for you, Tubbo explained, his voice shaking. Do you want me to send you the video? Gulping, Tommy nodded before remembering Tubbo couldn't see that over the phone. Yeah, do that. Right. Are you still at the meeting? Yep. We were in the middle of talking about shit when you called. Tubbo made a noise of sympathy. You need to tell them about this, okay? They'll help you work it out. Rambo and I are gonna head back to the soot house and we'll be waiting for you when you get back. Okay. I'll see you soon, Tubbo. Tommy told him, biting his lip. Stay safe out there. Will do. And don't worry, Tommy. We're not letting you go to prison. Tubbo reassured him, although he didn't sound too confident as he said that. The reassurance fell flat, though, because Tommy knew there was no way Tubbo could promise that. No one could really promise that right now. If Dream had evidence of Tommy healing the syndicate like he claimed, he could turn in Tommy at any time, and there'd be nothing Tommy could do about it. He would just be fucked. Bye, Tubbo, Tommy said before hanging up the phone. A few seconds after he hung up, he got a ding notification and saw that Tubbo had texted him 2 videos, one that looked like grainy security footage, and one with Dream standing in the center of the thumbnail. Tommy flinched when he saw the still image of Dream, and was too focused on the phone to notice Wilbur leaning over his shoulder until it was too late. Why the fuck did Tubbo send you a video of Dream? Wilbur asked, eyes widening. When Tommy was silent, Wilbur grabbed his chin and forced him to look up and meet his gaze. Tommy, come on. What the hell was that call about? Shit. Tommy had to explain what was going on, and everyone in the syndicate was going to freak out. Great. Just what he needed. Apparently, Dream ran into Tubbo and Rombu while they were on patrol and told them to pass along a message to me. Tommy started, his eyes dropping to the table. Tubbo has a video of it. Wilbur narrowed his eyes. Then let's play it. Slide it to the center of the table so we can all hear it, Phil ordered, a shudder ruffling his feathers behind him. Nodding, Tommy turned his volume all the way up and pushed the phone to the center of the table as ordered. Then, he leaned over and pressed the play button. Tommy. Dream's voice ran out over the tinny speakers, and just hearing Dream say his name again was enough to make Tommy's heart leap into his throat. If you're watching this, then you know I ran into your friends Ender and Nuke, and they were kind enough to let me pass on a message to you. Behind the camera, Tommy heard Tubbo mutter a "fuck you." He would have smiled at that if the situation were anything less dire. Anyway, I'm just gonna get straight to the point. With 404's help, I managed to find CCTV footage of you healing Siren for presumably the first time. If you don't believe me, I'm sending a copy to Nuke so he can send it to you. But the gist is, I can use this footage to send out a warrant for your arrest. Now, I haven't sent it to the Hero Committee yet because, frankly, I don't want to arrest you. You're just a kid who got caught up in shit he shouldn't have. And I don't think you deserve to be punished for that. That's fucking rich coming from him, Wilbur muttered, his jaw clenched. I'll give you a few days to decide, but if you don't want to get arrested, then you need to give me what I want. Dream paused then, folding his arms over his chest. And don't even think about trying to skip town, Tommy. If I find out that you left the city, then the next time I see either a syndicate member, including your precious little vigilante friends over here, since it's obvious you're all working together now, I'll kill them. I don't want to. But if it's what needs to be done, then I'll do it. We're not part of it. Don't bullshit me, Ender. Dream said, cutting off Ender, who wasn't in view of the camera. You worked with the syndicate to help Tommy escape from me. In my eyes and in the eyes of the committee, that makes you villains now. And I've already had you both reclassified as such. What? That's not fucking true, though! Tubbo protested. Shouldn't work with villains, then. Dream shrugged. Anyway, that's all I have to say to Tommy. You can end the video now, Nuke. And with that, the video ended, and Tommy felt like he was going to throw up. There was a moment of silence as everyone at the table stared at the phone, all with similar expressions of horror painting their faces. After a few agonizing beats, Techno spoke up. Well, that's a problem. Yeah, no shit, Techno, Wilbur hissed. Well, don't snap at your brother, Phil cut in, giving his son a stern look. Now I know this situation isn't ideal, but we can't stop panicking at the first sign of trouble. We knew Dream was going to retaliate at some point for Tommy's escape, and now we know what his strategy is. Tommy, did Tubbo send you the footage Dream mentioned? Sam then said, sounding much calmer than anyone else. Tommy nodded. Can I see the footage? Dream might be bullshitting when he says it's enough to get you arrested. I know what kind of footage the Hero Committee would consider strong enough to send out an arrest warrant, so I want to make sure he's not bluffing. Yeah, sure. Standing up out of his chair, Tommy reached over to grab his phone from the middle of the table. He pulled up the second video Tubbo had sent, and walked around to Sam's chair, holding the phone in front of him so he could watch. Wilbur, of course, followed Tommy and stood over his shoulder to watch as well, while everyone else stayed in their seats. Then, Tommy pressed play. The footage was staticky as hell. A camera was sitting on what seemed like a street lamp, pointing right outside a dark alley. After a few seconds of nothing happening, Tommy stiffened when he saw a flash of movement from inside the alley, just barely able to make out Wilbur in his full siren getup falling off the edge of the roof and onto the lid of the dumpster in the alley, before going limp and rolling off onto the ground. At the same time, Tommy himself came into view of the camera, pausing right outside the alley as Wilbur fell off the dumpster. From this view, he could only see the back of his own head, but Tommy recognized his backpack all the same. Then, the footage showed Tommy walking into the alley and staring at the unconscious figure of Siren for a few moments. They were just barely within view of the camera, and if the two of them had been 2 feet further back, they would have been invisible. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Tommy's mouth went dry as he watched himself drop his backpack and roll up his sleeve. He tugged Wilbur's shirt up, examining the wound, before his hands very clearly began to glow. Tommy knew how the rest of the scene went from there. The camera showed the two of them talking in the alley, although there wasn't any sound. Then, Siren got to his feet and stumbled out of the alley, the camera catching a full view of his blindfold mask as he turned down to the cafe. A few seconds later, Tommy emerged from the alley as well, the camera also catching a full view of his face before he turned down the opposite way of Siren. Then the footage ended. There was a moment of silence as Sam stared at the phone, his lips pressed into a thin line. "That's pretty damning," he finally admitted. "I hate to say it, but the committee could definitely arrest you with that." "Great," Tommy muttered, shoving his phone back in his pocket. "So I'm fucked then. Fucking fantastic." "Tommy, you're not fucked," Wilbur immediately said, sliding an arm around his shoulders and guiding him back to their chairs. "We're not letting you get arrested. That's a given." "Exactly. No way in hell are we letting that green bastard put you in jail," Quackity added on. The rest of the syndicate all murmured in agreement, but it didn't make Tommy feel any better. What are you gonna do to stop him? It's not like you can fucking give in to his demands," Tommy exclaimed, staring wide-eyed at the different villains. Phil folded his hands in front of him and seemed to be struggling to remain composed. "What are his demands, Tommy? He said only you knew what he wanted, so what does he want?" Tommy laughed, and it was a harsh, bitter thing that tore through his throat in a painful way. "There's only one thing he wants," Tommy said, shaking his head. "He wants the identities of the syndicate." And just like that, a hush fell over the group. Tommy wasn't surprised by the tense expressions that lined the table. Nikki and Jack were exchanging nervous glances. Hannah was staring down at her hands. Quackity had straightened up in his seat. Sam just looked sad, while Techno, Phil, and Wilbur all looked as though they had swallowed something sour. "And you're sure that's what he wants?" Phil asked slowly, as if asking for confirmation might make it not true. "It's the only damn thing he wanted to know when he kidnapped me," Tommy confirmed, nodding his head. "He kept asking me over and over again to tell him your identities, and I kept trying to tell him I didn't know, but he didn't believe me." Phil took a deep breath, furrowing his brows as he wrung his hands together. "Well, that's certainly a problem." "It doesn't matter," Wilbur then cut in, pulling Tommy tighter against him. "We're not letting Tommy get arrested, and that's final." "I mean, I agree with that, don't get me wrong," Quackity said, pulling his shoes off the table. "But then that means we might have to make a sacrifice." Tommy's eyes widened, and the others at the table all made indignant noises. "Wait, Wait, are you saying we should give in to him? Nikki hissed, glaring at Quackity. We can't give up anyone. Are you insane? Then how do you suggest we solve this, Nikki? Quackity challenged, meeting her gaze head on. We can't try to smuggle Tommy out of town, or else Dream will kill one of the kid vigilantes. If we get all three of them out, he'll kill one of us next time he sees us. And it's not like we can just keep him locked in a basement for the rest of his life. So what the hell is it gonna be? Nikki curled her hand on the table into a fist, but didn't have a response for Quackity. Instead, she slumped back into her seat, shooting daggers at Quackity with her eyes. Phil, come on, you know I'm right, Quackity continued, looking over at Phil. I don't want to do it either, but I think we need to at least talk about the possibility of sacrificing someone, because if we can't find an alternate solution, we can probably get Dream off our asses if we give him one skull. One skull? You mean one sacrifice instead of all of us? Techno asked, watching Quackity with something dangerous in his eyes. Exactly. Dream isn't an idiot. He knows he's not going to get all of us to reveal ourselves for Tommy's sake. But I'm sure he'd drop the warrant shit if we give him one person that he feels is worth the trade-off, Quackity explained, leaning back in his seat. Another silence descended over the table. Now, the looks the syndicate was sharing were filled with suspicion. The question now hung over their heads like a cloud. Who could the sacrifice be? Finally, after a few beats, Phil spoke up. While I don't want us to jump to sacrifice yet, he began, and Tommy straightened up hopefully in his seat. I do think it's worth a discussion. Just as quickly, Tommy slumped back down. He didn't want to sit and listen to the syndicate debate about who they were going to sacrifice on his behalf. It was a nightmare scenario, and the thought of them even entertaining the idea was ridiculous. No one is sacrificing themselves for me, Tommy cut in, glaring at Phil. I'm not a little kid you need to protect. I can handle going to jail. Tommy, there's no need to get unnoble right now, Phil told him gently, but just discussing possibilities. And either way, I'm not letting you go to prison. Tommy clenched his jaw, wanting to argue, but knew it would be pointless. If Phil wanted them to discuss options, they were going to discuss options whether he liked it or not. This is fucking stupid, Tommy muttered, folding his arms over his chest. There was another beat of silence around the table. As expected, though, Quackity spoke up first. So, if this is an open discussion, then can I start out with a suggestion? Techno huffed. If it's anyone besides yourself, we're gonna have problems. Quackity rolled his eyes. While I have no issue with volunteering myself, let's be real. No one even knows I'm associated with the syndicate. Dream wouldn't give two shits about me compared to the rest of you guys. Typical, Techno muttered, shaking his head. Look, I'm just being honest, man, Quackity said, holding his hands up in surrender. If you want someone that Dream would probably take back, though they're not one of the big three, Sam would probably be the best bet. Hannah let out a sharp gasp at this. Fuck off, Quackity! Sam isn't going back to the heroes! The committee literally has it out for him! I mean, he has a point, Sam muttered, dropping his eyes to the table. No, don't be ridiculous. You're not going back there, Hannah insisted, putting a hand on Sam's arm. Besides, if we want someone the heroes have a grudge against but can't reasonably be outright cruel too, then I think, well, just speaking from a totally objective place, Nikki would be a good option. Oi! Back the fuck off, Hannah! Jack shouted, frowning at her. Why the hell would you even say that? Because Dream's had it out for her ever since she choked Sapnap that one time, Hannah exclaimed, gesturing towards Nikki. Look, Nikki, you know I have nothing against you. I'm just speaking from a logical standpoint here, but Dream would probably jump at the chance to get your identity. Nikki scowled. Yeah, I fucking get that. but it's awfully bold of you to suggest me when you could be an option too. Hannah barked out a laugh at this. Me? Dream barely even knows I exist. I doubt he'd give two shits about finding out who I am. Then what about both you and Quackity? Since you're both so eager to point fingers, Jack suggested, raising an eyebrow at Hannah. Jester with a few rose thorn sprinkles on top? Hey! Quackity protested. What the fuck does rose thorn sprinkles even mean? Hannah asked, glaring at Jack. It means that neither of you would be enough to get Dream back off on your own. But if we put you two together, Dream might accept that for a sacrifice, Jack explained. Quackity's like a sundae, and we throw some rose thorn sprinkles on top to sweeten the deal. I told you already, Dream doesn't even know I work with the Syndicate, Quackity pushed, leaning forward in his seat. He won't care. Again, that's why we have the Quackity sundae with rose thorn. If you say rose thorn sprinkles again, I'm going to reach across that table and punch you, Jack, Hannah snapped, glaring at him. Hannah, I wouldn't do that if I were you, Nikki shot back, lifting one of her hands off the table. Oh, fuck. Were they about to fight? Tommy stiffened in his seat as he wondered if he was going to need to heal Nikki and Hannah in a minute, but was stopped when someone else spoke up. All of you shut up, Wilbur ordered, his voice echoing around the room. Instantly, everyone else in the room fell silent, although Nikki and Hannah continued to glare at one another from across the table. The silence held for a few beats. Tommy tried to open his mouth to speak, but quickly realized Wilbur had directed the order to everyone in the room, which included him. Good. Wilbur nodded after a few seconds. Now, I think there is one obvious choice here that none of you have suggested yet. But first, you can all speak again. Did you really need to shut all of us up for that? Phil asked, raising an eyebrow at Wilbur. Considering you were all being fucking idiots, yeah, I think I did. Wilbur nodded, not looking ashamed of what he'd done at all. Anyway, like I said, there's an obvious choice here, the only person that even makes sense to sacrifice. Quackity gave Wilbur a suspicious look. Who? A feeling of dread curled into Tommy's gut before Wilbur even said the words, as if he already knew what his brother was going to say. Meeting Quackity's gaze evenly, one word left Wilbur's mouth. Me. Drink break. Tommy's head whipped back towards Wilbur. What the? No! It's not going to be you! Tommy nearly shouted, grabbing Wilbur's shoulder and forcing him to meet his eyes. Don't be fucking stupid, Will! You're not going to give up your goddamn identity for me! Wilbur gave Tommy a sad look. Toms, come on. I'm the only person that makes sense. No! No, you fucking don't! Tommy argued, his heart rate picking up speed. I do, Wilbur repeated. Dream needs a skull big enough to satisfy him with just one of the Syndicate members' identities, so one of the leaders should be more than enough. But more importantly, I'm the entire reason you're in this mess in the first place. The security footage Dream has on you is literally of you healing me. If you hadn't done that, none of this would be happening right now. Oh, don't go blaming yourself again, you dumb shithead, Tommy snapped, glaring at Wilbur. I chose to save your life that night. I knew that if I got caught, there'd be consequences. You didn't ask me to heal you, so stop acting like it's your fucking fault. But even ignoring that, I'm still the reason you're here now, Wilbur pushed, not reacting to Tommy's anger. I sought you out after you healed me. I decided to befriend you in the cafe. I gave your address to Techno. It's all been me. I'm the only person that makes sense. Wilbur, Techno cut in, glaring at his younger brother with a ferocity that made even Tommy want to shrink back, despite it not being directed at him. You're not sacrificing yourself. End of story. Techno, kindly shut the fuck up. Wilbur shot back, although he didn't use his siren voice to force anyone into silence this time. Trust me, I've thought this through, and Dream won't back off unless he gets me, Techno, or Phil. And out of the three of us, I'm the one who's fucked Tommy over the most, so I need to be the one to make it up. You haven't fucked me over. Yes, I have! We literally talked about this last week. Yeah, but I didn't mean you should go fucking sacrifice yourself for me. Look, someone has to do it, so it might as well— Wilbur! Tommy! Phil yelled, his booming voice silencing both the boys immediately. For the love of fucking God, stop shouting at each other for 2 seconds so we could talk about this as a group. Tommy scowled at Phil. You're not seriously going to entertain the idea of Wilbur sacrificing himself like a goddamn idiot, are you? Phil was silent for a beat, sighing as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Trust me, I don't like the idea any better than you do, Tommy. But we're discussing options right now, not making any decisions. Ideally, though, we won't have to sacrifice anyone, he explained, his talons clicking against the table as he set his hand back down. Wait, can I bring up a point to counter Wilbur volunteering? Nikki spoke up, her voice having gone soft again after snapping at Hannah. Nikki? No, Wilbur. I have a point and you're going to let me say it, Nikki said, staring the man down. Ignoring all personal feelings, you still can't be the one we sacrifice. Why not? Wilbur challenged, raising an eyebrow. Nikki gave him a look that just screamed, "You're an idiot. If you give yourself up, all Dream has to do is look at your file and see the files for Phil and Techno, and he'll figure out who Zephyrus and Blade are too. That's how Tubbo and Ramu figured you guys out, right?" For the first time since bringing this point up, Wilbur actually seemed taken aback. She's got a point, Techno grunted. That's exactly how the kids figured us out. Wilbur frowned. But no, come on. They only figured you guys out because Techno has fucking pink hair. If Techno just dyed his hair and started wearing a wig or something as the Blade, then it'd be fine. I don't know, Wilbur. Phil and Techno still have the same heights and builds as the Blade and Zephyrus, so it'd at least make Dream suspicious, Dream added, leaning back in his seat. Well, he's not going to accept anyone else besides one of us three. You're lying to yourselves if you don't think that's the case, Wilbur argued, glaring at the rest of the table. Tommy was getting a headache now. He groaned and dropped his head into his hands, and quickly felt warm fingers run through his hair. Tommy almost leaned into the comforting touch, but stopped himself at the last second, instead slapping Wilbur's hands away as he glared at his brother through his fingers. Hurt flashed in Wilbur's eyes as he pulled his hand back. Tommy would have felt guilty if Wilbur wasn't being such an idiot. He didn't even want to think about Wilbur being the one to sacrifice himself. After all the bullshit he'd gone through to get this family, he refused to lose it so quickly. Look, I think we've discussed the possibilities of who to sacrifice enough for tonight, Phil then said, sounding much calmer than he had before. I'd rather try and focus on alternative options. I mean, I feel like we only have one other option if we're not going to give him anyone's identity. Techno shrugged, drawing all eyes back to him. We need to kill Dream. He said it so simply, as if it would be the easiest thing in the world. You know, as great as that sounds to me... Wait, a wave of nausea washed over Tommy. More killing. Great. You know, as great as that sounds to me, I don't actually think that's the best idea. Quackity chimed in. Trust me, I don't have any moral qualms with killing the green bastard, but didn't he say in the video that 404 helped him out with finding that footage? If we kill Dream, 404 would just send out the warrant for Tommy instead, Nikki murmured, gnawing on her lip. Then we just kill both Dream and 404, Techno pushed, fingers drumming along the boar skull in front of him. Wouldn't we have to kill Flame too? Jack asked, eyebrows pinched. He was at the warehouse when we rescued Tommy, so he probably also knows about the footage. Tommy stiffened at the mention of Flame's name. He thought back to those days in the warehouse, how guilty Flame looked when he realized he couldn't help Tommy, how he refused to leave his side to make sure Dream didn't do anything to hurt him, how much Tommy saw of himself in the hero. You can't kill Flame, Tommy said without thinking. Hell, you shouldn't even kill any of them, but especially not Flame. He actually tried convincing Dream to let me go when he found out Dream had kidnapped me. Wait, Flame wanted to let you go? Wilbur asked, leaning towards Tommy. He did, but Dream wouldn't listen to him, so Flame stayed in the warehouse to keep an eye on me and make sure Dream and 404 didn't do anything to hurt me, Tommy explained, shrinking back in his seat as all the attention turned back to him. He's not a bad guy, trust me. But he could have turned Dream and 404 in, couldn't he? Wilbur challenged. Tommy met Wilbur's eyes and forced himself to keep a poker face. And I could have turned you in for killing all those cops, but I fucking didn't. It's the same goddamn thing. Wilbur flinched back as if he'd been hit. Hurt once again flashed in his dark gaze, but Tommy couldn't think of another way to explain it to Wilbur. I'm not the same as Dream, Wilbur hissed, baring his teeth. Really? Because if you tally up both of your kill counts, let's be real, you definitely have the higher numbers, Tommy snarled, the frustration simmering under his skin boiling to the surface. So get off your high fucking horse, Wilbur. Wilbur opened his mouth, ready to snap back, and Tommy waited for it. He waited for the sharp insult, for Wilbur to either tell him to fuck off or go into even more reasons why he wasn't like Dream. But instead, he paused. He shot a dark look at Tommy and shut his mouth, looking away from him and shifting fully back into his own seat so he was no longer leaning into Tommy's space. Tommy was tired of this. He hated hearing the syndicate get into arguments about who they were going to sacrifice on his behalf. And he also hated hearing about them talking about killing Dream, 404 and Flame, like it was no big deal. Like they were just obstacles to be dealt with and not people. Huffing, Tommy slumped back into his seat and shot Wilbur one last dirty look before meeting the eyes of the rest of the table. Everyone was glancing between him and Wilbur in that awkward way friends always did when two people got into an argument, and everyone else just felt very uncomfortable watching from the sidelines. Tommy knew he probably should have held his tongue better, but he was pissed off about a lot of things right now and frankly just didn't care. So... Techno finally broke the silence with a long drawl. We just kill Dream and 404 then? If we kill them, Flame might end up releasing the footage anyway as revenge against... If we kill them, Flame might end up releasing the footage anyway as revenge against us, Phil pointed out, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear. I think it would be better if there was some way we could get Dream to back off without killing him. What? Like, we scare him? Techno asked, frowning at Phil. Maybe? I don't think there's much we can scare Dream with, but I think if we can talk to him face to face, we might be able to reach an alternate compromise, Phil explained. I doubt he's going to compromise on this. He knows he's got us by the throat, Quackity huffed, rolling his eyes. Very true, but I still think it's worth a try, Phil noted. The only problem with that, though, is that I have no idea how we can talk to Dream one-on-one, Techno pointed out, fiddling with the ends of his braid. If we tell him we want to meet, he's just going to think it's a trap. And if we go out looking for him, he's probably going to avoid us like the plague. Phil sighed, brushing his hair back from his face with one clawed hand. That's very true. While a meeting would be the best chance we have at working this out, I don't see how we can get Dream to agree to show up. So are we just back to square one then? Jack asked, glancing between Techno and Phil. We're not sacrificing someone, but we also have no way to get a meeting with Dream, so we're fucked all around. Or you guys could just stop being idiots and let me go to No! All the syndicate members, save for Wilbur, who still seemed like he was pissed at Tommy, snapped at once, cutting Tommy off. Groaning, Tommy flipped the group off, and they ignored him as they went back to their discussion. I think we've all had a very long night, Phil began, dragging a hand down his face as he spoke. And since Dream said we have a couple days to make a decision, it might be beneficial for us to take some time to think our options over. Almost instantaneously, a wave of relief seemed to wash over the entire group. I agree, Sam nodded, fiddling with his mask in front of him. Let's all go home and try to think of alternate ways we can figure this out. Then we can reconvene in a few days. Thank you, Sam. Phil smiled as he put his veil back over his head. With that, I declare this meeting over. Tommy, Will, Techno, let's head out. And with that, the three boys all got out of their chairs and followed Phil out of the meeting room, while the others all began to put their masks back on. Before the door shut behind them, Tommy glanced back and saw Nikki and Hannah talking softly to one another, seeming much calmer than they had been earlier. That was a relief. Things had gotten a bit nasty during the sacrifice discussion, and Tommy would hate for there to be lingering tension in the syndicate because of him. It didn't take long for them to get home. As expected, Tubbo and Rambu were already waiting for Tommy, both looking eager for answers to what the plan was. Instead of explaining that they didn't come to a conclusion, he just shook his head and headed straight for the stairs, figuring Phil or Techno could explain to the duo. Wilbur was ahead of him on the staircase, also going straight for his room. A part of Tommy figured he should apologize for what he said during the meeting, but he also didn't want to because he wasn't wrong. Dream and Wilbur really weren't all that different when it came down to it, and that, along with Wilbur's apparent ideas of noble self-sacrifice, were pissing him off. So Tommy hurried back to his room and he heard him and Wilbur slam their doors shut at the same time. Later that night, Tubbo and Rambu came and crawled into bed with him, and the three of them silently decided not to talk about the dark cloud hanging over their heads. Instead, they just turned on Tommy's TV, and Tommy played Animal Crossing while his two best friends watched until they all fell asleep. The next day, things were tense in the Soot household. The six of them, Phil, Techno, Tommy, Wilbur, Tubbo, and Rambu, all huddled around the dining table, drinking coffee with bleary eyes and giving half-hearted attempts at conversation. Rambu tried asking Techno about potatoes, which led into a small segment where the two of them talked about gardening, but the topic died out quickly. Phil asked Tommy if he was going to work again today, and Tommy said he wanted to, and Techno quickly volunteered to watch over him during his shift this time. The day passed quickly. Wilbur holed himself up in his room. Phil said he needed some alone time in his office to think over their options, and it wasn't long before Techno joined him. Meanwhile, Tubbo and Rambu took it upon themselves to try and distract Tommy from his possible upcoming prison sentence. It was like the days they'd spend on the sagging couch in their tiny apartment, watching nature documentaries and bickering about the most random things. They were all piled onto the couch in the living room, watching whatever Tommy wanted on the big TV that hung on the wall. At one point, Tubbo actually had to go to Tommy's room because he got called in to do a last-minute work assignment. Because despite everything, he and Rambu still had jobs. So that just left Tommy and Rambu on the couch. And Tommy liked watching nature documentaries with Rambu a lot better than Tubbo because he actually was interested in a lot of the strange animals they learned about, and would frequently ask questions that Tommy would jump to answer. Surprisingly, it was a good day given the circumstances. When the sun began to dip towards the hills, Tommy changed out of his pajamas, said his goodbyes to Tubbo and Rambu, before he and Techno headed out. The ride to the cafe was quiet, but not in an awkward way. Techno had soft classical music playing over the speakers, and Tommy had his head leaning against the window, watching the green and orange trees that lined the sides of the road turn into little more than blurs as the car drove by. It was a pleasant contrast to the chaos of the night before. Although Tommy could still see the tension lining Techno's shoulders, he didn't seem visibly upset about the situation, and that alone was easing Tommy's nerves just a bit. They got to the cafe, and Foolish almost started tearing up when he spotted Tommy walking in. He wasted no time in running out of the cafe as quickly as he could, with Tommy filling his spot without any trouble or fanfare. Unlike Wilbur, Techno didn't order anything, instead immediately settling himself at Wilbur's usual table. As Tommy ran the bottle of honey under some hot water to make it easier to squeeze, he watched as Techno reached into a black bag he'd brought with him, pulling out a thick book with yellowed pages before flipping it open to read. For the first few minutes of the shift, there was no line. All the customers inside had already been given their drinks by Foolish, so Tommy didn't have much to do. He kept glancing at Techno, wondering if he should make him something to drink despite him not ordering anything. After all, Tommy knew what he liked, and if he didn't want it, he could just throw it out. Before Tommy could blink twice, he found himself pulling out the tea bags and preparing a cup of Earl Grey. As he let the tea steep in the hot water, he steamed a bit of milk and carefully poured the frothy mixture on top of the tea. Then he grabbed the vanilla extract from the cabinet and poured a few drops in there as well, stirring it quickly before slapping the lid on the cup and sliding it into the pickup bar. "Techno, come get your drink!" Tommy called out, waving him down. Techno glanced up from his book and frowned. He replaced the bookmark in his book and pushed to his feet, folding his arms over his chest as he eyed the drink sitting at the pickup spot. "I didn't order anything," he said, picking up the cup and eyeing the blank side of it. It wasn't like Tommy had needed to write that one down after all, considering he was just making it for Techno for fun. "I know, but figured you might as well get something to drink since you're gonna be here for my whole shift," Tommy explained, shrugging as he rinsed out the cup for the steamed milk. "If you don't want it, you can throw it out." After staring at Tommy for a beat, Techno took a hesitant sip before letting out a pleased hum. "London fog," he muttered, nodding to himself. "Thanks, Tommy." Then, before Tommy could argue, Techno was digging into his pocket and pulling out a handful of cash. "Tech, I didn't—" "Take it and put it in the register. I wouldn't want to mess with Puffy's profit," Techno huffed. Tommy frowned as he counted the dollars. "This is way more than that drink costs." Techno, who was already walking back towards the table, just shrugged. "Put it in the tip jar, then." Fighting the urge to roll his eyes, Tommy dropped the extra change in the tip jar. Fucking rich people. Just had cash on them at all times and weren't even sure how they were carrying. And weren't even sure how much they were carrying. Typical. Luckily, or unluckily, depending on how you define it, the usual flow of customers resumed after that. The rest of the evening passed by how it always did. Tommy burned his hand on the espresso machine for the billionth time and had to hide his skin glowing as he healed itself. He tried to make a cappuccino for a Karen as she tried to lecture him for 10 minutes on how to make it properly. He muttered some things under his breath that would get him fired if Puppy heard it. Just business as usual all around. Time passed by quickly. Although the worry about his current situation lingered in the back of his mind, it wasn't that difficult for Tommy to lose himself in the comforting routine. As it got later into the evening, more customers began to filter out, and soon enough, Techno was the only one left in the shop, and it was closing time once again. Tommy went through his usual cleanup routine of wiping down the equipment, taking out the trash, and putting all the ingredients back in their correct places. Techno noticed that he was cleaning up and moved to stand by the door, watching the outside like a sentinel, even without a sword on his hip. Things were quiet at first, and for once Tommy was content to leave it that way. With his shift already being over, there was no longer anything to distract Tommy from his anxiety, and he was once again being beaten up by worry over his whole mess. He really didn't want to go to prison, but he didn't want anyone else to go to prison for him either. The very idea of Wilbur pulling some stupid self-sacrificial move made him sick to his stomach, which was only worsened by the bitterness that had been hanging between them since Tommy snapped at Wilbur during the syndicate meeting the night before. So yeah, Tommy was fine with letting things be quiet, because he had a lot going through his mind. But to Tommy's surprise, right as he took out the mop to wipe down the floors, Techno actually spoke up for the first time since he'd gotten his tea. So what are your thoughts on this whole, prison thing? Techno asked, with all the grace of a bull in a china shop. Huffing, Tommy kept his eyes on the ground as he started pushing the mop across the floor. I'm still pissed at the idea of any of you guys sacrificing yourself for me. Techno hummed. Yeah, I definitely wasn't thrilled when we were all talking about that yesterday, but it's not like we can just let you get arrested for helping us. It's a shitty situation all around, but let's be real. I'd go to prison for, 3 years? I'm not technically a villain. I'd just help you guys out and shit. If any of you guys revealed your identities and got arrested, you'd probably never see the light of day again, Tommy said, pushing them up with a bit more force than strictly necessary. I think you have a bit too much faith in the system to think you'd only get 3 years, Techno snorted. Stiffening, Tommy glanced up at Techno and he saw he was now flipping through the pages of his book, but didn't seem to actually be reading any of it. How long do you think I get then? Tommy asked, struggling to keep his voice even. Techno shrugged. I don't know, man. Technically, the usual sentence for assisting criminal activities would be somewhere around 3 to 5 years, but the Hero Committee would definitely try to pin more on you. They'd want to make an example out of you, so that other people don't get the same idea and start trying to heal villains, which is why our top priority right now is making sure you don't end up behind bars. Gulping, Tommy stared at Techno for a beat, before he put his head back down and resumed his mopping. His heart was pounding in his chest at this new information, but he tried to force himself to calm down by focusing on the cleaning. So am I really just fucked then? He asked, unable to keep a sliver of fear from leaking into his tone. There was no hesitation from Techno when he responded. No, we're not letting you get screwed over like that, Techno reassured him, sounding so calm that Tommy couldn't help but relax the tiniest bit. Even if we gotta smuggle you, Tubbo, and Rambu out of here in suitcases, we'll do that before we let the committee get its hands on you. Tommy snorted at the mental image, and the tightness in his chest unwound just a bit. I think Tubbo is the only one of us who can fit into a suitcase. I don't know about that. Rambu seems pretty bendy, Techno commented, leaning back against the wall. Well, honestly, you have a fair point there, Tommy replied, chuckling a bit as he remembered all the terrifying ways Rambu had won Twister games in the past. But, is our only alternative plan still to try and meet Dream to talk it out? At the moment, yeah. But Phil has contacted some outside resources, and we're hoping one of those might be able to help us fix the situation. Techno explained. That's good, Tommy muttered, pushing the mop further across the room. That's, really good. Good idea. We're hoping so. Techno shrugged again. Though it seems like it might be hard to get Wilbur off this whole self-sacrifice idea he seems to be fixated on. Gritting his teeth again at the reminder, Tommy nodded. He can say that again. He's being such a fucking idiot. Avoided me all day today, like the dramatic bitch he is. He has a tendency to do that when he's mad about something, Techno said, shoving his book in his backpack. I think he's more upset about you comparing him to Dream than anything else, though. Looking up from the floor again, Tommy narrowed his eyes. You going to scold me for that? Techno shook his head. Nah, I think you made a fair point. Will's got this whole shtick where he can call himself the bad guy and claim he's fine with that, but only if he's being called a bad guy in a way that lines up with whatever story he's telling himself in his head. Like, if you call him out on something he thinks he was in the right for doing, or in this case compare him to someone he hates, he's gonna get real defensive or upset about that. Tommy raised an eyebrow. You don't mind being called a bad guy, though? I don't really see the point in labeling myself a good guy or a bad guy. I have my goals, and I do what I need to do to get them done. That's all I care about, Techno explained, tucking a strand of pink hair behind his ear. But all that aside, I know my little brother, and he's got a lot of guilt over you getting dragged into our world, which is why he's pushing the self-sacrifice thing so hard. That's stupid, though. He explained to me why he gave you my number that one night, and it wasn't something malicious, Tommy argued, frowning at Techno. I thought you would have figured out by now that Wilbur blames himself for just about everything, even when it doesn't make sense, Techno snorted, rolling his eyes. Yeah, I think I'm starting to realize that, Tommy muttered, wheeling the mop bucket back to the closet. Techno was quiet as Tommy put away the rest of the cleaning items, finally having finished what he needed to do for closing. After Tommy hung up his apron and slung his backpack over his shoulder, Techno took a look around outside the cafe before he gave Tommy the all clear. I'm having another Listerine patch. It helps soothe my throat. They didn't speak again until they were back in the car, driving safely away from the cafe. I still think you should talk to Wilbur sometime tonight, Techno said, picking up the conversation from where they'd left off like there'd been no pause, mostly because I'm gonna bang my head into a wall if tomorrow we have another painfully awkward breakfast like this morning. I guess you're right, Tommy grumbled, sliding down into the leather seat. I don't like fighting with him anyway, so might as well just stop letting him be a little bitch and make him talk this out. If it doesn't work, let me know and we can hide in my room to eat breakfast, Techno joked, shooting Tommy a sly smile. Tommy grinned. Sounds like a plan. They made it home without issue. Once they were inside, Techno headed to Phil's office, while Tommy went straight for his room. He was startled when he saw Tubbo and Rambu had both seemingly fallen asleep in his bed while he was at work, and put his stuff down as quietly as possible before leaving the room again. Tommy was way too wired still to even think about sleep. There was still the lingering anxiety about the prison sentence hanging over his head, and then there was the entire conversation with Techno about Wilbur. Standing outside his room, Tommy glanced Tommy glanced across to Wilbur's room, noticing the light on under the door. While he could go downstairs and watch movies on the couch until he got tired, he promised Techno he'd try to talk to Wilbur, and right now seemed like the perfect opportunity. Groaning to himself, Tommy trudged across the hall and didn't let himself think before he knocked on the door 3 times. "Who is it?" Wilbur called out from behind the door almost immediately. "It's me," Tommy called back, grimacing at how awkward he sounded. "Can we talk?" There was a pause. The fact that Wilbur didn't say yes as soon as he asked was enough to make him wince, even though he knew it wasn't nearly as big of a deal as he was making it out to be. Then, after a few beats, "Fine." Breathing a sigh of relief, Tommy pushed open the door to Wilbur's room. It had actually been a while since Tommy had been in Wilbur's room. In fact, he might not have been in there since before he got kidnapped, and he could tell because it was the cleanest he'd ever seen it. Sure, there was still a bunch of dirty laundry in there, but it was all shoved into a single corner this time. And yeah, there were still a ton of loose papers. They were all contained to his desk, with his bed actually being clear to lay down on. String lights crisscrossed over the bed, reflecting a soft orange glow across the entire room. Wilbur was settled against his pillows with his guitar on his lap, wearing the same pajamas he'd worn at breakfast that morning, his hair a frizzy mess of curls. Wilbur eyed Tommy warily as the door clicked shut behind him. There was an awkward moment where they both just stared at each other, before Tommy walked over to sit on the edge of Wilbur's bed. Once he was settled down again, Wilbur spoke. "You just got home from work?" Tommy nodded. "Yup." "And you decided we needed to talk right now?" He pushed. "Yeah. Tubbo and Romby were sleeping in my room, so I can't hang out in there. Plus I saw your light, so I knew you were awake. Figured no time like the present." Tommy shrugged, picking out a stray thread on his shirt. Wilbur raised an eyebrow and pushed his guitar off his lap, settling it on the other side of the bed. "Are you here to apologize, then?" "Apologize?" Tommy scoffed. "No, I have nothing to apologize for. If anything, you should be apologizing to me." The raised eyebrow quickly dropped as Wilbur frowned. "The fuck do I have to apologize to you for? For being an idiot with the whole 'I'm gonna sacrifice myself for you, Tommy' bullshit you pulled at the meeting last night," Tommy explained, finding the urge to roll his eyes. "Jesus Christ, you're still going on about that?" Wilbur snapped. "It's called taking responsibility for your actions, Tommy, but I guess you wouldn't know about that since you're such an immature goddamn child." Ouch. While Wilbur had called Tommy an immature child before, he always said it with an air of fond teasing. It was part of their banter. Tommy called Wilbur an old man, and he called Tommy a child. It had never been something Wilbur had said as an actual insult, but this time it'd be impossible to mistake his words as anything but. "That's not taking responsibility for your actions, you fucking prick," Tommy snapped back, his already thin patience waning. "It's called feeling guilty over things you shouldn't because you want to throw yourself a goddamn pity party instead of dealing with your shit." Wilbur recoiled, his frown deepening even more. "I'm not throwing myself a pity party. I'm the one who dragged you into this shit. I don't know why you're acting like I didn't." "Not everything is about you, Wilbur," Tommy shot back. "It wasn't just you. It was Techno and Phil and Nikki and basically fucking everyone in the goddamn syndicate. But I was the one who gave Techno my address. I know. You said it about 100 damn times," Tommy hissed. Huffing, Wilbur folded his arms over his chest. "I just don't get why you're so pissed at me about this. I said I was going to try and make up for all this shitty stuff I did. This is me trying to fix what I fucked up." At this, Tommy paused. Was Wilbur really that stupid? He searched Wilbur's eyes, trying to see if he was just saying shit, It seemed like he was telling the truth. If this is you trying to fix all that, then you're going about it in a really shitty way, Tommy scoffed, although his voice was a bit lower now. What? Trying to keep you from going to jail isn't a good thing? Wilbur asked sharply, narrowing his eyes. No, actually, it's not, Tommy said, meeting Wilbur's eyes. When you fuck up, you don't get to fix it by just sacrificing yourself for some bullshit noble cause. If you actually want to fix things, you need to stay. Stick around and face what you did instead of just jumping at the first opportunity to become a martyr. Wilbur clenched his eyes. Wilbur clenched his jaw, eyes dropping to his lap. Did you get that from one of Phil's spiels about being a better person or whatever the fuck? Tommy ignored the weak attempt to change the subject. I'm serious, Will. How the hell do you think you're helping me by going to jail for the rest of your life? A beat passed. Wilbur took off his glasses and began to fiddle with them in his lap. I thought it would be the best option for everyone involved, Wilbur muttered, keeping his head down. I finally have a family outside of Tubbo and Ramu for the first time in my whole life, and you thought that me losing my brother was the best way to make it up to me? Tommy asked softly. Wilbur flinched, continuing to mess with his glasses. I don't know. It just made the most sense to me, he muttered. Another moment of silence passed and Wilbur looked up again. Plus, after I suggested it, you literally compared me to the man who kidnapped you. What was I supposed to think about that? Oh. Shit. Look, I didn't mean it like that, Tommy said, desperately trying to backpedal. It's hard to explain, but basically when Flame found out Dreamer kidnapped me, he almost turned Dreamer 404 in, but in the end, he didn't, because he said they were his family. He didn't approve of what they did, but he didn't want to send them to jail. And I guess, I don't know, I'm the same way. I don't like that you killed all those people, Will, but you're my family. I'd rather stick by you, even when you do shit I don't like, than not have you around. And not having me around includes me being in jail, Wilbur muttered, seeming a bit calmer now. Yeah, basically, Tommy agreed. And as stupid as it sounds, given all the shit we've dealt with, I don't actually like to get you involved in my shit either. Now this made Wilbur look up, and instead of scowling at Tommy like before, he was just frowning like he was confused. What do you mean? I mean, I chose to heal you that night in the alley. I knew that if I got caught, I could be arrested, but I did it anyway. I don't think you should get thrown in jail for my choice, Tommy explained. Or back when Dreamin' 404 had me kidnapped, they threatened to kidnap you too. Wilbur Soot, not Siren. And I didn't know you were Siren at the time, so the idea of you getting dragged into that too just scared the shit out of me. Wait, why would Dreamin' 404 want to kidnap me as a civilian? Wilbur asked. Tommy shrugged. When 404 watched my dreams that one time, you kept popping up in them. You kept popping up in all of them, and you ended up thinking you were my brother. Legally, you know. So he told Dream about you, so they could threaten you to get me to talk. Pausing, Tommy took a shaky breath. And again, I hadn't really made the connection you were Siren yet, so I was fucking terrified of what they'd do to you. I didn't want you getting hurt because of me. And even though I know who you are now, that's still true. I don't want you getting thrown in jail for me. Wilbur was silent for a moment, no longer fiddling with his glasses and instead just staring at his lap. His frown fully faded. leaving something like regret in its place. I'm sorry, Wilbur finally said, dropping his glasses on the bed. I didn't think about things like that. It's okay, Tommy nodded, wrapping his arms around himself. I'm sorry for not explaining what I meant when you said you were like Dream. It's alright, Wilbur reassured him. How you explained it makes sense. Another beat passed between them, and Tommy shifted on the bed so he was fully facing Wilbur. Can I hug you now, you fucking idiot? Tommy asked. A small smile quirked the corners of Wilbur's lips. He was so clingy, he teased as he leaned forward, wrapping his arms around Tommy's shoulders to hug him tightly. Pretty bold of you to call me the clingy one out of the two of us, Tommy scoffed as he buried his face in Wilbur's shoulder. Says the one who just begged me not to go to jail because you'd miss me, Wilbur shot back, his chuckles reverberating through his shoulders. You know, I've actually changed my mind. Go to jail and stop annoying me all the time, Tommy teased, pulling back from the hug after a few moments. Too bad, you're stuck with me now, Wilbur grinned, reaching out to ruffle Tommy's hair. Tommy laughed as he slapped Wilbur's hand away from his head. Wilbur smacked the back of his head in retaliation before he leaned back against the pillows, picking up his guitar off the side of the bed and gesturing for Tommy to sit with him. As Tommy scrambled over against the pillows as well, Wilbur's smile faded, and he reached over to rest a hand on Tommy's shoulder once he was settled. We're gonna find a way out of this, Wilbur promised him, staring right into his eyes. Swallowing down a lump in his throat, Tommy nodded. I believe you will. The problem was that, again, Tommy knew there wasn't anyone who could promise that for sure. But he let the reassurance soothe his anxiety anyway, and tried to shove it all out of his mind as he listened to Wilbur start playing a new song on his guitar, wanting to get Tommy's opinion. Another day came and went, and there was still no progress on their plan. Dream had said he'd give Tommy a few days to decide, but he hadn't specified exactly how many days that meant. The more time passed, the more Tommy's anxiety grew. When was their time going to be up? When was Dream going to get tired of waiting for an answer and just send out the warrant for Tommy's arrest? As Tommy went through another shift like usual, he couldn't help his heart from skipping a beat every time the door chimed with a new customer. He was just waiting for the moment a police officer strolled in, holding up a pair of handcuffs and telling Tommy he was under arrest. This time, Hannah was keeping an eye on Tommy during his shift. She hung out at a different table than Wilbur usually was at, playing some kind of video game on a bulky laptop the entire time. One benefit of knowing the syndicate's identities now was that they were no longer confined to just showing up after work hours in their full villain get-ups. Now, everyone else in the cafe was oblivious to the fact that there was a villain in their midst, but Tommy could still be watched over all the same. The shift was calm. By the end of it, the smell of coffee beans was ingrained under his fingernails, and he had a dark splotch on his jeans from where he had accidentally spilled black tea on himself. Because Techno wasn't there to pick him up, Hannah said she was going to walk him all the way back to the Soot's house. He knew it was pointless to try and argue that she didn't need to walk him all the way, and frankly, he didn't actually want to argue about that. Even though he felt guilty about Hannah needing to escort him all the way back to his home, he was more nervous than ever about Dream, and he knew Hannah wouldn't let anything happen to him. And we're done, Tommy muttered as he twisted the key in the door, locking up the cafe. Hannah smiled and offered her arm. Let's get going then. Rolling his eyes at the gesture, Tommy looped his arm through hers. You don't need to hold on to me, you know. This isn't for you, Hannah snorted. I don't want creepy men to catcall me, and they won't with you and I walking like this. Couldn't you just, choke a guy with a vine if he pulls shit with you? Tommy asked as they started down the sidewalk towards the subway. I could, but I'm not in costume right now, so I'd rather avoid showing my powers to other people if I can, Hannah explained. Though, of course, if I'm subtle about it. Trailing off, Hannah shot Tommy a mischievous grin as a small flower blossomed from her hair, right above her ear. Tommy snorted. I'm sure that was necessary. It was, Hannah argued. The more plants I have on me, the more energy I have. So if I'm going to be guarding you on this walk, then... Suddenly, Hannah was cut off by loud laughter coming from across the street. Stiffening, Hannah whipped around to see the possible threat. Tommy did the same, his heart pounding in his ears, but as soon as he spotted who it was, he let out a breath of relief. Walking on the opposite side of the street from Hannah and Tommy, Monarch and Aurelion were laughing as they talked with one another. Tommy hadn't seen the two of them since that one night he healed Aurelion, and it was hard to know that neither of them looked any worse for wear. It was nice to know that neither of them looked any worse for wear. Tommy was about to wave to the two vigilantes when realization hit him in the face. The Syndicate needed to find a way to meet with Dream, but Dream would think any meeting arranged by the Syndicate would be a trap. While he had already met with Nuke and Ender to pass his threat along, he also was under the assumption the two of them were part of the Syndicate as well. But Dream didn't know about Tommy's connection to Monarch and Aurelion. He'd only met with them once, and Dream hadn't brought them up to Tommy at all when he had been kidnapped. As far as Dream knew, the two vigilantes had no idea who Tommy was. Which meant that Dream wouldn't have any reason to be suspicious if the two of them asked to meet with him. Holy shit. Tommy might have just found a way out of this mess. Monarch! Aurelion! Tommy called out, aggressively waving the two vigilantes down. The two of them immediately turned towards his voice, waiting as he rushed across the street with Hannah in tow. Tommy? Monarch greeted, dipping their head. It's a pleasure to see you again. It's been a while. Yeah, there's a reason for that, Tommy told them, not bothering with any preamble. Did something happen? Aurelion asked, tilting his head a bit to the side. You could say that again, Tommy huffed. Dream fucking kidnapped me. Both vigilantes reeled back. What? They both hissed in unison. Dream kidnapped me for helping the Syndicate, Tommy explained in a rush. But anyway, I got rescued, but I'm in a bit of trouble again. What's going on? Monarch asked, furrowing their brows. Also, is it okay for your friend to hear this? They added after a beat, pointing at Hannah. Oh yeah, they didn't know Hannah was Rosethorn. Yeah, she's fine, don't worry about her, Tommy said, ignoring the confused look Hannah was giving him. Long story short, Dream's blackmailing me now because he wants to send me to prison. Wait, can we go back to the part where you got kidnapped? Aurelion questioned. Hang on all, Monarch told their partner before turning back to Tommy. What are you planning to do? At this, Tommy grinned. Well, actually, I have an idea that I think you two can help with. I feel like that's a good enough cliffhanger to end on. I have an assignment that is due in less than an hour, and I need to finish that up. So, this was really fun. I'll probably go live again on Wednesday. I don't know if it's going to be reading this or playing. You know what? It's been a while since I played Minecraft. Let's do that. So we'll take a little break from Tommyinnit's clinic for supervillains and we'll play like Hypixel or something. But until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!